Hello everyone and welcome back to Mr. Night Fear. I know many of you tune in to these stories to help you drift off to sleep. So before you settle in, I'd love for each of you to leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. And if you're enjoying the episodes, don't forget to give a like and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get comfortable, relax, and begin. I was 12 years old when my family lived in an old house in Long Beach, California. I'm 22 now, but I still remember everything that happened there like it was yesterday. One night, my parents were out, and my older cousin was babysitting me and my baby sister. It was late, probably around 11:40 p.m. We were sitting in the dining room, eating oranges, just talking. I was facing the living room when, out of nowhere, I saw something that made my heart stop. A little boy, dressed in a tuxedo, ran incredibly fast from the chimney across the living room. He looked like he was about 5 or 6 years old. It happened so quickly, just a few seconds. But I knew what I saw. My breath caught in my throat, and I immediately told my cousin. She brushed it off, saying I was probably just tired and imagining things. But I wasn't. I was wide awake. The strange thing was, I only saw him from his head to his knees. His feet weren't visible, and yet he moved so fast. I remember feeling frozen with fear. That wasn't the only time I saw him. Over the years, I would catch glimpses of him out of the corner of my eye, running past my bedroom door, darting through the kitchen. It was always the same. Fast. Too fast to really focus on. But after a while, I stopped feeling scared. It was almost like I got used to him. Until one night. My sister and I shared a room, and she had this big toy kitchen set that she loved to play with. That night, I woke up to a faint noise. At first, I wasn't sure what it was, but as I listened, my body filled with a deep, unsettling fear. It sounded like someone was playing with the toy kitchen, moving the tiny pots and pans. I pulled my blanket over my head, barely breathing. I didn't want to see what was happening. My heart pounded as I lay there, sweating under the covers. Then, I felt it, something leaning over me, like it was trying to see my face. I squeezed my eyes shut. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. The tiny noises from the toy kitchen kept going, soft but constant. And then, something tugged at my curtains. I was paralyzed. My body refused to move, my mind racing in terror. This went on for what felt like an hour. The small, eerie sounds, the presence hovering near me, the overwhelming fear. Then, I heard my dad get up to get some water. The second I heard him, I bolted out of bed and ran straight to the kitchen, throwing my arms around him. He looked confused and asked what was wrong. Through shaky breaths, I told him everything. He listened, then tried to reassure me. Maybe I had been dreaming. Maybe it was just a mouse. But we never had mice in that house. He walked me back to my room, but when we got there, the toy kitchen was a mess. The pots and pans were scattered everywhere. I cleaned them up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, had been there. My dad let me sleep with the TV on that night, but he still insisted it was nothing. The next morning, I woke up to find the toys all over the floor again. That's when I knew it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a mouse. It was the little boy. I lived in that house for 7 years, and for 7 years, I saw him, running, watching, never speaking, and he wasn't the only one. There was also the man in the hallway, but that's a story for another time. That house, it was something else. What do you think? Have you ever experienced something like this? When I was 12 years old, my family lived in an old-fashioned house in Long Beach, California. I'm 22 now, but I still remember everything that happened there. Before we moved into that house, I never believed in ghosts, spirits, hauntings, none of it. But after living there, I couldn't ignore what I experienced. It was a 3-bedroom house. I shared a room with my baby sister, while my parents and brother had their own rooms. Every night, when it was time for bed, everyone would close their doors, except mine. I don't know why, but I never liked sleeping with my door shut. There was one thing about that house that always felt unsettling. The hallway. It was long, dark, and always seemed too quiet. Some nights, I stayed up late watching Disney Channel while the rest of the house was asleep. I liked having that little bit of time to myself. But one night, while I was watching TV, I saw something, just out of the corner of my eye. A tall shadow. It was a man. He peeked into my room from the hallway, just for a second, before stepping back and disappearing. I quickly turned my head, but by then, he was gone. For some reason, I didn't feel scared. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. So, I shrugged it off and kept watching my show. But then, it happened again. That same shadowy figure leaned in, just enough for me to see, and when I turned, he was gone. He kept doing it, peeking in, disappearing, like he was watching me but didn't want to be seen. Eventually, I was too tired to care, and I fell asleep. I saw him again a few nights later. It was evening, and I was in the kitchen making eggs. From where I stood, I could see the hallway through an open space above the counter. As I cooked, I noticed movement. There he was, standing at the edge of the hallway, peeking, watching. Every time I turned my head to look, he vanished. But the moment I looked away, I could feel him there again. It was like a game, one I didn't want to be playing. It was strange, though. I wasn't afraid. I didn't feel threatened, just unsettled. Then came the night I'll never forget. That night, my brother was still awake because his girlfriend was over, and their door was slightly open. A little bit of light from their room spilled into mine. At some point, something woke me up. I didn't hear anything, but I felt something, like someone was in the room. I opened my eyes, and there he was, a man. Not a shadow this time, a real, clear figure. He was standing in my room, facing the hallway, like he was hiding from someone. His expression was tense, worried even. His skin was pale, and he didn't look at me. He just stood there, frozen, staring into the hallway like he was afraid of something I couldn't see. I couldn't move. I felt completely stuck, like my body wouldn't respond. Then I snapped out of it. My hand shot to the lamp on my nightstand, and I flicked it on. That's when he turned. His eyes met mine for the first time, and then he slowly vanished. I slept with my lamp on for the rest of the night. We eventually moved out of that house, but I've never forgotten his face, or the way he stood in the hallway, like he was waiting for something, or someone. Even now, I still wonder, who was he, and what was he hiding from? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. For the past year, my mom has been telling me that money has been going missing, little by little, without any explanation. At first, it was just $100. My uncle had been visiting at the time, and since he slept in the room where my mom kept the money, we thought maybe he had taken it, but we never found out for sure. A few months later, $300 disappeared. Again, no answers. Every time money went missing, my mom would gather us, me and my siblings, and ask if any of us had taken it. She always hoped that if one of us did, we'd feel more comfortable admitting it to a sibling rather than to her, but no one ever confessed. Over time, my mom became more and more worried. She couldn't stop thinking about it. Who could be doing this? She started suspecting my older sister, who visits every few weeks. Since the money always seemed to go missing around the time she came home, it made sense, at least at first. My sister is in university, so we wondered if maybe she needed extra cash. But when we asked her, she swore she never took any money, and I believe her. I know for a fact that sometimes the money disappears even when she's not here. Then, in September, another $100 vanished. My mom looked at me, eyes full of worry, and told me. Later that day, she came back and said she had counted wrong. The money wasn't missing after all. But the next day, she admitted she had lied. She had just been so anxious that she didn't want to believe it had happened again. Someone really had taken the money. And then, in October, everything got worse. My mom checked her money and nearly broke down crying. This time, it wasn't just a small amount. It was $1,900. Gone. She asked me directly if I had taken it. I told her no. Our family is big, 7 people in total, but my 3 younger brothers don't even know where the money is kept, and even if they did, they wouldn't be able to get to it. Some of the hiding spots require lifting something heavy, something they wouldn't be able to move alone. Even my mom asks for help when she needs to access it. That's another strange part of all this. The money doesn't go missing from the same place each time. My mom has different hiding spots, places no one would think to check. Only a few of us even know about them. Me, my mom, my dad, and my older sister. Even then, I only know 3 of the 4 locations. My sister gets blamed the most because, again, it often happens around the time she visits. But I know it's not her. It's happened on weeks when she hasn't been here. My mom checks the money on one day, and by the next check, days later, it's gone. It's heartbreaking to see her like this, constantly stressed, trying to figure out how to replace what's missing. The money belongs to my dad. She just manages it for him. And my dad, well, he's very careful with his money. He keeps track of every dollar and has plans for how to use it. If he finds out, he won't listen to any explanations. He'll just get angry. He's not violent, but his temper is strong, and my mom dreads having to tell him. Because of that, she keeps questioning me, begging me to be honest if I took it, promising she won't be mad if I just tell the truth. But I didn't take it, and I know my sister didn't either. We've thought about setting up cameras, but we never know exactly when the money will disappear. It happens every month or so, sometimes even longer, so we'd have to record constantly. And even then, would we really catch anything? At first, we considered the idea that maybe a neighbor had somehow taken it, but that doesn't make sense either. They don't know where my mom hides her money. If it were an outsider, wouldn't they take all of it at once instead of just a few hundred at a time? And then there's one more detail that makes this even stranger. When my mom counted the missing $1,900, she realized it hadn't all disappeared from one place. She found that $400 was missing from one hiding spot. $1,200 was gone from another. $300 had vanished from a third. That's not all. She noticed that in one of the hiding places, a dollar bill was slightly torn, as if someone had pulled it out too quickly. In another, the string around one of her money pouches had come undone, as if someone had opened it and left it that way. She's more upset than I've ever seen her. She's hoping to replace the money before my dad finds out, but she doesn't know how, and it's taking a toll on her. Lately, she's been having anxiety attacks. She barely sleeps. She just keeps asking herself, who could be doing this? And the worst part, I don't have an answer. I know it's not me. I know it's not my sister. But I also know my mom is right. The money is disappearing. So what's happening? I don't know. And honestly, that's what scares me the most. This happened in the late 1960s, near Los Angeles, California. My name is Casey, and at the time, I was just 9 years old. My older sister, Patricia, was much older than me, minus 16 years older, in fact. She had just had her first baby with her husband, Ron. They were excited about their new life as parents and had recently rented a small 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. I lived with my mom and stepdad in another part of the city, but one Saturday we went to my sister's house for a barbecue. It was a nice evening. After dinner, we all sat in the living room, talking and enjoying each other's company. The baby was asleep in his nursery. Everything seemed normal, until we heard it. A baby crying. Mom stood up right away. "I'll check on him," she said, already heading toward the nursery. But before she could take another step, my sister stopped her. "It's not him," Patricia said calmly. We all looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Mom asked. Patricia hesitated, then admitted something none of us expected. "We hear a baby crying in this house all the time," she said, "but it's not ours." The room fell silent. Mom didn't know what to think, but she went into the nursery anyway. When she came back, she looked a little pale. "He's sound asleep," she said softly. The crying stopped right before I walked in. That's when my sister and her husband told us about the strange things that had been happening in their new home. Some of it was small, like the swinging door between the kitchen and dining room. It never stayed how they left it. Sometimes it would stay wide open for hours, no problem. Other times, no matter how many times they propped it open, it would slowly swing shut. They even used heavy books to hold it open, but somehow it would still end up closed. They could sit in the living room and watch it happen, watch the door slowly move, as if someone unseen was gently pushing it. Then there was the coffee. Both Patricia and Ron had early work shifts, and they were big coffee drinkers. Every night, they set up their percolator so that all they had to do in the morning was turn on the burner. But some mornings, when they woke up, the coffee was already made, hot, freshly brewed. It didn't happen every day, just every so often. But when it did, it was always the same. They would wake up to find the coffee ready, the house quiet, and no explanation for how it had happened. And then there were the voices. At random times during the day or night, they would hear low, hushed whispers. It always sounded like two people having a quiet conversation in another room. But no matter how hard they listened, they could never make out the words, and every time they went to check, the voices would stop. It wasn't long before they'd had enough. After just a couple of months, my sister and her husband packed up and left. They never did find out who or what was in that house with them. But whatever it was, it didn't want to be alone. When my dad was young, maybe around 8 or 9 years old, he used to see something terrifying at night. He would be lying in bed, ready to sleep, when from the dark corners of his room, a woman dressed in black with a veil over her head would float toward him. She would kneel beside his bed and whisper in his ear. He never understood what she was saying, but he was always too scared to move. This went on for a long time. He would peek through a small hole in his blanket, but he never had the courage to get up or speak to her. Around the same time, he began experiencing something even stranger. Sometimes, when he looked at people, their faces would shift. He would see a skull instead, and every time this happened, the person would die not long after. Even though my dad has always been able to see and hear things that can't be explained, he refuses to believe in anything paranormal. He is deeply religious and brushes off all of his experiences as imagination. But my mom thinks differently. She always joked that he passed his gift to me since I am the only one of my siblings who has ever seen anything. I think she might be right. My boyfriend and I like to drive around downtown Los Angeles at night. I love looking at the buildings and lights, especially on weekends when the city feels alive but peaceful at the same time. One night on our way home, I had an idea. I told him we should drive by Linda Vista Community Hospital. According to Wikipedia, it opened in 1905 and closed in 1991. It was originally a hospital for railroad workers, but shut down due to too many lawsuits. Over the years, it became known as one of the most haunted places in LA and was even featured on Ghost Adventures and in horror movies. When we got there, I was surprised to see that the hospital was now gated and under construction, with a security guard standing outside. It turns out they're turning it into apartments, which seems crazy to me because they aren't even tearing it down, just remodeling it. A few teenagers were standing nearby, probably planning to sneak in, but they looked just as surprised as we were when they saw the lights and construction going on. I told my boyfriend, "This place isn't even haunted. There's nothing here." And as I looked back across the street, I said, "The park is more haunted than the hospital." Right across from the hospital is Hollenbeck Park. It's small but big enough to have a lake with ducks and paddle boats. When I was younger, my dad used to bring us there. My siblings and I would roll down the big grassy hills and feed the ducks. As I stood there looking at it, I suddenly had these flashes, quick, overwhelming images. I saw someone struggling in the water, trying to reach the shore, completely soaked, arms reaching out. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman, just a shadowy figure in distress. As the image played in my mind, I felt a deep sadness, a heavy pressure in my chest, and a knot in my throat. It was about 10 p.m. and the park was quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I turned to my boyfriend and asked if we could walk down toward the lake. I hadn't been to the park in years, but I felt like I needed to go. As we walked, I tried to ignore the feeling, but it only got stronger. Then I stopped in my tracks. In a small, tucked-away corner by the lake, there was a cluster of candles. My heart sank. I knew right away that someone had died there recently. There was no picture, no notes, no flowers, just a collection of candles burning in the night. My boyfriend and I looked at each other, both in shock. I took a few pictures, and we left. By the time we got in the car, it was almost 11 p.m. I felt drained, like something had been weighing on me the whole night. On the way home, I turned to my boyfriend and asked, "Do you think I'm crazy?" He didn't even hesitate. He looked at me, completely serious, and said, "No." The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I needed to know if what I had felt was real. I searched online for any recent deaths at the park, and there it was. A woman had been found floating in the lake earlier that year. She was a mother with several children, homeless and struggling. The report said she had been using drugs, and there was no foul play, or at least that's what they claimed. That was all the information they had. There was no way I could have known, no way I could have guessed, but somehow I had felt it. I can't control when these things happen, and they don't happen often, but when they do, I'm always left in the same state of confusion. My mom always says my dad passed something down to me. Maybe she's right. Maybe it's all just a coincidence. But after that night, I don't think so. This story took place in San Diego, California. My family and I lived in that house for 6 years, and it was there that I experienced some of the most unsettling moments of my childhood. The history of the house was disturbing, and maybe that explains why the energy inside felt so strong. A man had lived there alone for years, well into his old age, and from what I was told, he wasn't a pleasant person. He was known for being aggressive toward trespassers, even going as far as shooting at anyone who cut through his backyard to reach the street that ran along the hill behind the property. As the story goes, he shot and injured a young man not long before he passed away. The energy in that house was heavy, and all of us could feel it. But for a family of 7, the rent was affordable, and in a city as expensive as San Diego, that was hard to pass up. Strange things happened often, but they were usually small. I would feel a tap on my shoulder when no one was around. Sometimes, while I was reading, my book would suddenly be yanked from my hands and land in my lap. It happened twice, and both times I was completely alone. The bathroom, though, was the place that unsettled me the most. I avoided it whenever I could. I don't know how to explain it, but every time I went inside, I felt like something was waiting for me just outside the door. One night, I had to sleep on the couch because my sister, who I shared a room with, was sick, and my mom didn't want me to catch what she had. I was wide awake, trying to get comfortable, when I heard someone in the kitchen. It sounded like one of my parents making a snack. I could hear the fridge door opening and closing, the rustling of food wrappers, the quiet clinking of dishes on the counter. It was a familiar sound, and honestly, it was comforting. I never liked being alone in that house, so knowing someone else was awake made me feel safer. After a while, I got up to use the bathroom, and since I was curious about who was taking so long in the kitchen, I figured I'd check. But when I stepped inside, the room was completely empty. The counters were clean, not a single dish or leftover ingredient in sight. The fridge door was closed. It was as if no one had been there at all. My mom had already gone to bed, and my dad was outside in the garage visiting with friends. There was no explanation for the sounds I had heard so clearly just moments before. When I was 7, my older siblings were babysitting my younger brother and me. My 2 older brothers and my sister were at the end of the long hallway playing video games. My younger brother and I were in the living room, playing with our toy dinosaurs on the couch. There were 2 recliner chairs in the room, sitting across from each other with a good amount of space in between. As we played, I glanced up at one of the chairs and froze. Standing beside it was a man. He wasn't solid, but he wasn't completely transparent either. There was a faint glow around him. but I could still see the details clearly. He had a dark beard, a neatly cut hairstyle, and wore a blue suit with a tie. In one hand, he held a briefcase. He walked toward the other recliner, but before he could reach it, he disappeared. I gasped. My brother looked at me and asked what was wrong, but I didn't want to scare him. I forced a smile and shook my head. Nothing, I said, going back to our game. But then, just as suddenly as before, the man reappeared. This time, I watched as he continued walking, reaching the second recliner. He sat down, placed his briefcase on the floor beside him, took a deep breath, and then he looked right at me. That was it. I jumped up and ran down the hallway screaming. When I told my siblings what I had seen, they didn't believe me. They teased me about it for years, laughing off my story. But my younger brother saw the look in my eyes that night. He knew I had seen something I would never forget. Even now, after all these years, that memory hasn't faded. I can still picture him, standing there in his suit, calmly moving through the room as if he belonged there. Of all the eerie things that happened in that house, that moment is the one that has stayed with me the most. Because in that moment, I knew without a doubt, I wasn't alone. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. This happened when I was a teenager, still living at my parents' house. My dad and brother were out of the country visiting family, so it was just my mom and me at home. It was the longest time my parents had ever been apart, and my mom took it really hard. She was deeply sad, often staying up late in the family room, crying. To keep her company, I started sleeping in her room so she wouldn't feel as lonely, even though I never liked that room. Growing up, my brother and I never felt comfortable in our parents' bedroom. We couldn't stay in there for long, whether the light was on or off. There was always something about it that felt wrong. No matter the time of year, the room was always cold. Some days it was just chilly, but other days it was freezing to the point where walking barefoot actually hurt. Even in the middle of summer, when the rest of the house was warm, that room stayed ice cold. But because we had grown up with it, we never questioned it. We thought it was normal. Seeing our breath in that room didn't alarm us, and we never once thought about ghosts or anything paranormal being the cause. It was just the cold room, and we hated it. As we got older and became more interested in the paranormal, we started trying to figure out why it was so cold. With our parents' help, we checked everything. There was nothing wrong with the AC, and the house was well built. No gaps, no drafts, nothing that should have made that room so much colder than the rest of the house. My parents guessed that maybe the sliding door was to blame and even taped up large sheets of plastic to block out any possible cold air. But the sliding door never actually felt cold. It was just the only explanation they could come up with. Still, it didn't help. Every night, they had to sleep bundled up under layers of blankets, even when the AC wasn't on. Looking back, it feels like the house got stranger as we grew older. The cold became more intense, and that uneasy feeling in the room only got worse. That night, my mom was in the family room, crying softly like she did every night since my dad had left. I was emotionally drained, so I went to bed early, lying on my side and waiting for her to finish. The only light came from the hallway lamp, casting a dim glow into the room. I was just starting to relax when I heard it. The sound of bed springs creaking behind me. Then, the mattress began to shift, slowly compressing, as if someone was getting into bed next to me. I felt it clearly, the weight settling onto the mattress, the familiar pressure of someone lying down just inches away from me. I froze. For a moment, I was confused. My mom was still in the family room. I could hear her crying. So who was in bed with me? I didn't move at first, trying to make sense of what was happening. Then, without turning my head, I slowly reached my arm behind me, feeling for whoever or whatever was there. Nothing. There was no one. The bed beside me was completely empty, but the weight was real. I felt it. At that moment, I was too exhausted to be afraid. I don't know why, but instead of panicking, I just shrugged it off and let myself drift to sleep. I reasoned that if something physical had been next to me, I would have jumped out of bed and run out of the house screaming. But since I couldn't see or touch anything, I convinced myself I was fine. Now, if something like that happened to me today, I would be gone in seconds, running like my life depended on it. Looking back, I can't believe how calm I was. That house had always been strange, but that night was the first time I truly felt something in it, and I know for certain I wasn't alone. For a while, I worked as an RN at a prison in California. After months of job searching, I was just relieved to find a nursing position, so I took it without much thought. It was a huge adjustment, being locked in a facility filled with some of the worst members of society. But I learned the routines, adapted to the job, and after 3 months, I was working on my own. That's when I started experiencing things I still can't explain. The first strange event happened when I was assigned to the prison hospital. That morning, I had just finished passing medications and was sitting at the nurses' station charting. The other nurses had stepped out for their usual break, and since a nurse had to be present at all times, I stayed behind. To my left, a hallway led to patient rooms, and to my right, the custody officer's desk was visible. It was quiet, and I was focused on my work when I suddenly felt someone poke my right shoulder. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the hallway was empty. I brushed it off, thinking maybe it was just a muscle spasm, and went back to charting. A few minutes later, it happened again. This time, I stood up. The custody officer was still at his desk doing paperwork, and the inmate porters were sweeping the hallway. The other nurses were still in the break room down the hall. There was no one near me. I started to wonder if I was imagining it, but later that day, during shift change, I was giving a report to the oncoming nurse when I felt the same sensation, this time on my back. It wasn't just one poke, it was constant, as if someone was standing behind me, trying to get my attention. I ignored it, not wanting to say anything and sound crazy, but inside, I was nervous. My back was against the cabinets, and no one was close enough to be touching me. I finished my shift as quickly as I could, grabbed my bag, and left. A few days later, I was back at the prison hospital, this time working the night shift. One of my assigned patients was dying of cancer and needed pain medication every few hours. At around 3 a.m., I went into his room to administer his IV meds. As I stood by his bedside, I suddenly heard the water running in the sink behind me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Many hospital sinks are motion activated, and I figured I must have triggered it somehow. But as I finished the medication and turned around, I realized the water wasn't running anymore. The sink was wet, but I hadn't used it at all that night. Then it hit me. The sinks in these rooms weren't motion activated. They had to be turned on manually. I didn't stick around. I left the room and returned to the nurse's station, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping over me. Every time I had to go back into that patient's room, I prayed nothing else would happen. Thankfully, nothing did. But I never stopped wondering, if I hadn't turned that sink on, then who had? The last event happened in the early morning hours when I was checking my mailbox in the employee mailroom. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was reading through some paperwork with my back to the door when I heard the distinct sound of a key turning in the lock. I didn't think twice about it. Other staff members came in and out at all hours. I heard the door open and close, followed by footsteps shuffling behind me. I turned around, ready to say hello and ask them to lock up on their way out. But there was no one there. The door was closed. The room was empty. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to tell myself the sounds must have come from a different room, but as I walked down the hallway, I realized every office was dark and locked. There was no one else around. I left quickly and hurried back to the hospital unit, refusing to look over my shoulder. After 6 months, I quit and found a job outside of corrections. I dreaded going to work at the prison. From the moment I started there, my anxiety was through the roof, and I struggled with depression the entire time I worked in that place. The overwhelming darkness of that environment weighed on me, and it only got worse. Now that I've left, I realize how heavy the energy inside a prison truly is. It's not just the presence of criminals or the constant surveillance. It's something deeper, something I can't explain. The feeling of being watched never left me, especially in the hospital. Yes, there were cameras, but I've worked in hospitals outside of corrections, and this was different. It felt like something unseen was always there, just out of sight. There are people who can work in prisons without issue, but I wasn't one of them. Even now, it bothers me that I never actually saw anything. I only heard and felt things. It makes me question my own memories, makes me doubt myself. But I know what I experienced, and I know I will never work in a prison again. Since I was about 7 or 8, I started seeing things I couldn't explain. My first experience was in the hallway of my home. A pure white light appeared, and in the middle of it stood a tall, bald, skinny man. He didn't look at me. He just paused for a moment, staring at the wall in front of him. Then, without turning, he walked straight into the wall and disappeared. When I told my mother what I saw, she said I was dreaming, but I know I wasn't. After that, I started seeing what people call shadow figures. At times, I'd mistake them for family members walking past me, only to turn and realize no one was there. It became so normal that I didn't feel scared, just uneasy whenever it happened. The house always felt darker at night, so dark I could barely see my hand in front of me. I would hear noises, whispers, soft movements when I was alone. No one else ever seemed to experience these things, just me. During high school, I had a different kind of experience, one that left a physical mark. I had just gotten home from football practice and was getting ready to shower when I suddenly felt a sharp, burning sensation on my side. I looked down to see 2 long scratches appearing right in front of me. They weren't there before, and I hadn't touched anything. I stood there for a moment, confused more than afraid, then shrugged it off and took my shower. Years later, I moved out, and everything stopped. No shadow figures, no strange noises, nothing. But when I had to move back to my parents' home, the uneasy feeling returned almost immediately. Every night, I felt like someone was watching me. I turned my head quickly, expecting to catch someone there, but there was never anything. A few months after moving back, I started waking up with scabs on my neck, shoulders, and arms. At first, I thought I was scratching myself in my sleep, but after a while, I realized something wasn't right. The scratches were too precise, always 2 perfect parallel lines in places I couldn't have reached easily. Month after month, new scratches would appear, and then, just as suddenly, they stopped. I never got another one after that. One day, my wife noticed something unusual on the ceiling of our bedroom. It was the face of a man with a beard, looking angry, as if someone had dragged their fingers through the paint to carve it out. We both stared at it, trying to make sense of it. The next day, it was gone. The ceiling looked completely normal, as if nothing had ever been there. I also started hearing tapping sounds above my bed when I was alone, but I ignored it, refusing to show any fear, just in case something was feeding off it. Then my mother passed away suddenly from an aneurysm. It shattered me. I cried for months, feeling a weight on me that I couldn't shake. But everything changed after she visited me in a dream. She looked exactly as she did when she passed, wearing the same clothes. Knowing she was gone, I asked if she was okay. She smiled and said yes, that a man had helped her come see me. Behind her, a strange tunnel-like opening appeared, almost like a wormhole. A shadowy figure stood inside it and called to her, saying they had to go. She turned to me, said goodbye, and disappeared. When I woke up, I felt lighter, as if something had been lifted off me. And the house felt different too. The darkness at night wasn't as deep. The shadows were gone. The noises stopped. Whatever had been there before, whatever had watched me for years, was gone. It felt strange at first, but it also felt good. But then something else started happening. I began hearing my name being called in the middle of the night. The voice sounded just like my mother's. At first, it was soft, but when I didn't wake up, it got louder, repeating my name again and again until I opened my eyes. It wasn't frightening, but it left me wondering why. I searched online and found that many people have experienced hearing their names being called, usually in dreams or as they wake up. But one night, something different happened. I heard my name as usual, but this time, another voice answered. It repeated my name, confirming it. That was the first time I felt unsettled. I woke up quickly, not scared, just confused. I still don't know why it keeps happening. It happened again last night. And I can't help but wonder who or what is calling out to me, and why. In a few of my other encounters, I've mentioned my grandfather, someone I believe may have visited me in my old house. I was never entirely sure if it was him or just an older man's presence, but I always had a feeling. What I hadn't shared before, though, was that I was visited by him in another place, and I wasn't the only one. In these encounters, it wasn't just a fleeting image or a feeling. My grandfather physically touched me. Before she moved, my grandmother lived in Santa Maria, California, and the house she had shared with my grandfather for years. It was there that he passed away, tragically, before I was born. Most of the house felt normal, but the guest room, the one I always loved sleeping in when I visited, had a presence, one that wasn't just in my imagination. Others had felt it too. The first time I met my grandfather, I was around 6 years old. I was staying with my grandmother for a visit, and like any mischievous little kid, I refused to go to sleep. She had told me several times to turn off the light, but it was 3 a.m., and I was still wide awake. My mother had always told me that when they misbehaved as kids, my grandfather would gently give them a Charlie course by gripping their leg tight, not to hurt them, just as a warning. That night, without any warning, I felt it. A sharp, sudden grip on my knee, just enough to make me stop what I was doing. It wasn't painful, but it was enough to make me freeze. Confused, I turned off the light and finally fell asleep. The feeling disappeared completely. At the time, I didn't understand what had happened, but as I got older, I started to put the pieces together, especially after my second experience. When I was about 10, I was once again staying at my grandmother's house, sleeping in the guest room. It was late, and I was just starting to drift off when I felt something. A gentle, warm touch, like someone rubbing my back. Then, a soft kiss on my head. Still half asleep, I thought it was my grandmother checking on me. Smiling, I lifted my head, ready to whisper good night. But when I opened my eyes, I saw something that stopped me cold. A man stood in the doorway, dressed casually. He looked right at me and smiled. He put a finger to his lips and a quiet shaw motion before turning and walking away. I was too shocked to move, too confused to be scared. It was only the next day that I realized he looked exactly like my grandfather. Years later, when I finally shared my experiences with my cousin, her reaction surprised me. She went pale. Then, in a quiet voice, she told me something she had never shared before. One night, while she was sleeping in that same guest room, she woke up to the feeling of fingers running gently through her hair. Thinking it was our grandmother, she turned to say good night, but there was no one there. I've told my mom these stories many times, but both she and my dad don't believe in ghosts. They always laugh it off, dismissing it as coincidence or imagination. But there was one time when even my mom couldn't brush it off so easily. We were at dinner when she casually brought up the time my cousin and I had talked about seeing Grandpa's ghost in the house. I confirmed it again, and she hesitated for a moment before sharing something that even made her a little uneasy. The house my grandmother had lived in was sold after she moved away. The new owners were family friends who had spoken to one of my other cousins who still lived in the area. They had a strange question. They asked if my grandfather had been the kind of man to joke around, to play pranks. My cousin confirmed that he was. Then, they told her something that gave me chills. Multiple times in the middle of the night, the woman who now lived in the house had woken up to the feeling of someone tickling her toes. At first, she thought it was her husband, but the hands felt rough, not like a woman's touch, and every time she looked around, there was no one there. Only then did they remember. My grandfather had died in that house. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Or maybe Even after all these years, he was still there, playful, watching over us, letting us know he never really left. I live in Las Vegas, but my family and I regularly visit California. When I was 16, we went on one of those trips and stayed at a Hilton in the LA area. It was nothing out of the ordinary. I had my own room attached to the main room, and my parents had theirs. It was a simple setup, and at first, everything seemed normal. That first night, though, I had trouble sleeping. I stayed up watching TV for a while before finally turning it off and settling in. It was around 2 a.m. when I finally started to drift off. That's when I heard it. Loud footsteps. Then heavy breathing. It wasn't normal breathing. It sounded labored, almost like someone struggling for air, the kind of gasping wheeze you might hear from a hospital patient with a breathing tube. It had a deep, mechanical sound to it, something that reminded me of Darth Vader. At first, I thought it was someone outside making noise. Maybe another guest. Maybe someone in the hallway. I was annoyed, but not alarmed. I turned over in bed, trying to ignore it, figuring there wasn't much I could do about it. But after a minute or two, I realized something chilling. The sounds were getting closer. The footsteps, the breathing. Every second, they seemed to be moving toward me. I had always been sensitive to spirits. I had my fair share of strange encounters before, but nothing had ever truly scared me. Even as a kid, when I had a terrifying run-in with 2 glowing amber eyes staring at me from my guest bedroom door, I had managed to shake it off. But this time, I wasn't prepared. The footsteps stopped, but the breathing didn't. I felt something hot, damp, like breath, trailing down the back of my neck. My eyes shot open. I tried to convince myself it was just the air conditioner acting up. My parents were skeptics and had told me my whole life that ghosts weren't real, so I tried to believe them. But as I lay there, the breath still on my neck, I started searching for the air vent. There wasn't one anywhere near my bed. The only vent in the entire room was across on the far wall. There was no way I was feeling the AC. No way it could explain what was happening. I didn't care to figure out what it was anymore. I flew out of bed, turned on the lights, and just like that, it all stopped. The footsteps, the breathing, the feeling of hot air on my skin. I ran straight to my parents' room, shaking. They weren't happy to be woken up, and they dismissed my panic immediately, saying I had a nightmare. But I knew I hadn't. I was awake when it all happened. I had been lying there, eyes open, still feeling it. I begged them to let me sleep on the couch bed in the main room or even on a chair in their room. Anywhere but my room. I could tell whatever was in there wasn't friendly. It wanted me to know it was there. It wanted to scare me. And whatever it was, I knew it wasn't some harmless ghost like Casper. They refused. They insisted I go back to bed, saying I was imagining things. I had no choice but to return to my room. Reluctantly, I dragged myself back, heart pounding, but somehow I fell asleep. The rest of the night was quiet. The next day, I tried to brush it off. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe I was paranoid. The rest of the stay was mostly uneventful, except for the feeling of being watched whenever I was in that room. I spent most of my time at a theme park, so I avoided it as much as possible. By the second night, nothing strange had happened, and I started thinking maybe my parents were right. Then, on our last night there, I was sitting at the desk in my room, packing up some things, and I heard it. A deep, guttural cackle. It wasn't just a laugh. It was something wrong, something that seemed to vibrate through the room. The sound sent a chill through my body, and I froze. It lasted only about 30 seconds, but that was long enough. I didn't go back into that room until my parents forced me to that night. I was beyond relieved when we left the next day. I didn't care what it was, an angry spirit, something worse. I just wanted to be as far from that room as possible. My friend later suggested it might have been a demon. I don't know. I try not to dwell on it. I was just thankful that, whatever it was, it never hurt me. It just scared the hell out of me. And I've never had an encounter like that again. Every day, I walk past a mortuary on my way to work and again when I return home. Sometimes, if I remember, I say a little prayer as I pass by. The entrance to my workplace has a long corridor with marble floors before you actually reach the main office. I sit at the front desk, which means I spend most of my time alone at the front. Every now and then, usually in the morning, I hear footsteps echoing down the corridor. But when I look to see who's coming, there's no one there. It happens often enough that I've started to shrug it off, though sometimes I hear the same footsteps in the afternoon as well. One morning, on April 10, 2014, I was in the kitchen with a coworker making coffee. As we stood there, we both heard footsteps coming from the hallway. Without saying a word, we stepped out to see who it was, but the hallway was empty. I turned to my coworker. "You've heard that, right?" She nodded. "Yeah." That was the first time I knew for sure it wasn't just me. Sometimes when I'm at my desk, I hear a small tapping noise from my right side. There's a drawer and a cabinet there, with a door behind them that I'd never actually seen open. It almost sounds like something small being dropped inside, but every time I check, there's nothing in the drawer, and I have no idea where that door even leads. I can't help but wonder, could my workplace be haunted? Or is something following me? Did something latch onto me from the mortuary I walk past every day? I've read before that spirits can attach themselves to people, but I've never been sure if that's just a theory or if it actually happens. I've always had strange experiences ever since childhood. It's never been constant, but every so often, I'll get a feeling like I'm not alone. Certain places feel off. I don't always see or hear things, but I sense them. People have noticed too. Sometimes friends or family ask me to visit their homes to see if I feel anything unusual. My sister's friend once asked me if I could pick up on anything in a bedroom where someone had taken their own life. I stood there for a while and then told them, "No, not here, but there's something in the kitchen." Their reaction told me everything. They admitted they often heard things in the kitchen, even when no one was in there. So what does that mean? Am I some kind of magnet for spirits? Is this a curse? A gift? I don't know. All I know is that these things keep happening, and I don't know how to stop them, or if I even can. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've always had a connection to the other side, seeing, hearing, and sometimes even speaking to spirits. It runs in my dad's side of the family, so to me, it's always been a part of life. Now, let me explain the title. When I was a little girl, I had an imaginary friend named Alex. But the truth is, Alex was never just imaginary. He was real. A little boy, maybe 5 years old, who's been with me for as long as I can remember. How I first knew his name is a mystery. Maybe he told me himself, or maybe I just started calling him that and he responded. Either way, he's been around ever since. Alex doesn't talk much, but I still see him sometimes. He's followed me through every move, always nearby but never intrusive. When I hear small noises in the night or see lights flicker, I just know it's him. And strangely, I'm never afraid. I acknowledge his presence, and then everything settles. But there's one place where Alex never goes, my old room in my grandmother's house, and I understand why. That house, the one we moved into in 2001, has something in it, something dark. My family refuses to believe it, but I know what I've felt, what I've seen. There's something in that house and that room specifically, and whatever it is, it's not friendly. When I was 13, my life got difficult. That was the year I truly realized my dad was abusive. I fell into a bad place, using drugs just to feel okay. But through everything, Alex never once stepped foot into my room there. It wasn't until I got sober, nearly 5 years ago, that I truly began to understand why. Even now, when I visit my grandmother, I avoid staying the night in that house whenever I can. Because when I do, terrifying things happen. Every single time. Some nights, I wake up trapped in my body, unable to move, paralyzed. I feel something pressing down on my chest heavy and suffocating. Then, the room around me changes. Flames crawl up the walls, the air thick with smoke, and I feel it. A presence. Something watching me, hunting me. I fight to move, to break free. And then suddenly, I can. In that moment, I see myself, crawling through the fire, desperately trying to reach my grandmother's room. She's sleeping peacefully, and I scream for her. But she never hears me. Only once did my grandfather wake up. He found me frantic, telling him something was in my room trying to kill me. But when he looked, everything was normal. The fire was gone. But I could still see it. I could still feel it. And then, just like that, I wake up for real. Not in my room. Not in my bed. But in the living room, every time, Alex is there. I don't see him, but I know he's near. His presence is familiar, protective. A silent reassurance. But sometimes, it's worse. On nights I can't sleep, I lie there for hours, staring at the ceiling. And then, somewhere between midnight and 3 a.m., something changes. I get out of bed, but it doesn't feel like my choice. It's like something else is moving my body, pulling me toward the window. And then I start talking. I speak to the night sky, about death, about hurting myself and others. But it's not me. It's not my thoughts. It's something else inside me using my voice. And then, just like that, the grip loosens. I snap back, horrified. What the hell did I just say? I don't want to die. I don't want to hurt anyone. Shaken, I leave the room and sleep on the couch. And before anyone suggests anything medical, I know my mind. I've had tests done. I'm in my 2nd year in the U.S. Army. I am stable, grounded, and fully aware of myself. But whatever is in that room, it's real, it's powerful, and it is not Alex. Because Alex has followed me everywhere, yet he has never, not once, stepped inside that room. When my family and I moved into our new 2-story home, we never expected anything unusual. The neighborhood was full of newly built houses, all standing where acres of peach orchards once grew. You'd think that hauntings only happen in old, creaky houses with a long history, but we quickly learned that's not always the case. Our home had 6 bedrooms, 3 upstairs and 3 downstairs. Everyone slept upstairs, except for my oldest son. He preferred staying downstairs, saying it was easier than going up and down for things. The second downstairs room was filled with toys and books, and the last room was mostly for storage. At the time, we were a family of 5. My wife had recently started working as a nurse, pulling long and exhausting shifts, which meant I spent most nights alone with the kids. Our routine was simple. After 8:30, I'd send the older 2 to bed and try to get my youngest to sleep as soon as possible. Once they were all asleep, I'd finally have some time to unwind after a long day. That's when the strange things started happening. Some nights, while I sat watching TV, I'd notice something just at the edge of my vision. A dark figure standing near the breezeway, hovering in my blind spot. Every time I turned to get a better look, it would vanish. The first few times, I told myself it was just my imagination, nothing more than a trick of the light. But the chills running down my spine told me otherwise. I decided to keep it to myself. My wife was already exhausted from work. I didn't want to add to her stress. But then, my daughter started seeing things too. One night she came into my room, her voice shaking. "Can I sleep in here with you and my little brother?" she asked. I looked at her and asked why. Her answer made my stomach drop. "I keep hearing someone walking outside my bedroom," she whispered. Then it came inside. I could hear it moving around. To show me what she meant, she shuffled her feet against the carpet. The soft, eerie sound sent a shiver through me. I forced a smile and told her there was nothing to be scared of, even though I wasn't so sure myself. Then, one night, my wife saw something. She had the night off, and after a late dinner, she sent the older kids to bed while she stayed up feeding our youngest. I was relaxing on the couch when she suddenly snapped. "James, I told you to go to bed." Her voice was sharp, the kind of voice parents use when they know their kids are up to something. But then she paused. Her eyes darted toward the game room, then the bathroom. She got up and checked both rooms. When she came back, she looked confused. "What's wrong?" I asked. She hesitated. I could have sworn I saw James go into the game room. I thought he was sneaking in to play instead of going to bed, but he's not there. He's asleep in his room. I didn't know what to say, because I believed her. Then came my mother-in-law's visit. She stayed with us over Christmas, and being an early riser, was always the first one awake. One morning over breakfast, she casually mentioned something strange had happened. "I got up early to start breakfast," she said, stirring her coffee, "and I saw someone go into the game room." My wife and I exchanged a look. "Who did you think it was?" My wife asked carefully. "I thought it was your daughter," she said, frowning. I was going to ask why she was up so early, but when I went in, no one was there. Everyone was still asleep. We didn't know how to respond. My wife was pale, but she nodded. We both knew it wasn't our daughter. To this day, I still get goosebumps thinking about it, but strangely, over time, I've come to see it differently. Not all spirits are there to harm. Some, I believe, are simply lingering, existing alongside us in ways we don't fully understand. I've often wondered if this spirit was a child, once full of life, now simply wandering the only home it knows. So we chose to live with it. My father always said, if it doesn't hurt you, learn to live in harmony with it. And that's exactly what we did. I'm 24 years old, and I still sleep with the covers over my head. Embarrassing? Maybe, but after what I experienced as a child, it's a habit I've never been able to break. My family has always had a connection to the paranormal, and I've had more than a few encounters myself. But this is where it all started for me. When I was little, my favorite question was always, "Who's that?" My mom would hear me ask it over and over, pointing at empty spaces in the room, my young eyes fixed on something she could never see. At first, she assumed it was just a childhood quirk, something innocent. But as I got older and could explain what I was seeing, she realized it was something else entirely. I called them the black people, not because of anything human about them, but because they were just shapes, dark, shadowy figures in the form of people, with no faces, no details, just empty blackness, except for their eyes. I remember them standing in my room at night, silently watching me, or whispering to each other in hushed, hurried voices, voices I could never fully understand. I'd wake up in the darkness, their presence looming over me, and in the daylight they were still there. I'd get ready for school, staring down the staircase, and one of them would be there at the bottom, staring back. My mom never dismissed what I saw. Unlike some parents who brush these things off as imaginary friends, she understood. She had grown up with her own encounters and knew that in our family, these things were real. "They're back?" She'd ask me gently, "Where are they?" I'd tell her how many there were, describe where they stood. She'd nod, trying to reassure me. "They can't hurt you. Just ignore them." But I couldn't. They weren't just watching me. They were waiting. I never knew what for, but I could feel it, that sense of being claimed, like the way people imagine the Grim Reaper, waiting for the right moment to take you away. It wasn't just eerie. It was terrifying. Eventually, I got used to them. It became normal for me, until the nightmares started. I don't remember most of them now, but there's one I will never forget. Even after all these years, it still feels as vivid as the night it happened. In my parents' bedroom, there was a huge mirrored closet, an entire wall of glass reflecting the room. Almost every night, I'd sleep on the floor next to that mirror because being near my parents made me feel safer. That night, I woke up screaming. My parents shot out of bed, rushing to me. I was sitting there, wide-eyed, staring into the mirror, crying, yelling that they were going to get me. In my nightmare, I was standing in the middle of our cul-de-sac. Across the street, a group of them was huddled together, whispering in that fast, jumbled way they always did. Then, all at once, they turned toward me. I felt it immediately. They wanted me to go with them. And wherever they were going, it was not a good place. Every second, I could feel myself being pulled in, something dragging me toward them, and I had no way to stop it. Then I heard my dad's voice. Even in my terrified state, I knew he was my way out. My parents had dealt with my night terrors before, and they knew that somehow my dad was the only one who could reach me, could pull me back. He knelt beside me, his voice calm but firm. "I'm right here," he said, taking my hand. "Do you feel me holding your hand?" I nodded, still crying, still shaking. "They can't hurt you while I'm here," he assured me. "Now tell me, where are they?" I pointed. "What do they want?" "They want me to go with them," I whispered. "But I'm scared." His grip tightened slightly. "You don't have to go with them," he said. "You're here with me. They can't take you." For 10 minutes, we stayed like that, him grounding me, keeping me from slipping back into the nightmare. And finally, I calmed down. He gave me one last instruction. "Tell them they need to leave," he said gently, "and then close your eyes." I did as he said. He picked me up, placed me in their bed, and I slept the rest of the night there. That was the last time I saw them so clearly. My younger cousin, though, has had similar experiences, ones that lasted much longer, and every once in a while, I still catch a glimpse of a shadow out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes I hear whispers just as I drift off to sleep, but it's nothing like it used to be. Still, because of that experience, I never sleep without the covers over my head. It's not rational, I know, but it makes me feel safe, like a barrier between me and whatever's out there. I don't know what they were. I don't know where they wanted to take me. But I do know one thing. It's not something I'd wish on any child. I was staying at my cousin's house for the night after one of their birthday parties. It was late, around midnight. My cousin Danielle and I were lying in bed, waiting for her sister, Natalie, to come get us so we could go night swimming. We did this almost every time they had a party. The pool was always warm, and it was something we looked forward to. As we lay there, we suddenly heard laughter and splashing from the pool. Danielle's bedroom window faced the backyard, so we could see the pool from her bed if we sat up. Thinking Natalie had gone ahead without us, we jumped up and ran downstairs. But when we opened the back door, there was no one outside. The only one there was Marshmallow, her dog, who was curled up in the corner near the door. As soon as we opened it, he bolted inside like he had been waiting to get away from something. We figured maybe Natalie and her friends were hiding, playing a joke on us. So we walked around the backyard, checking behind the bushes and the lounge chairs, but there was no sign of anyone. Then we heard laughter again, this time coming from the park right next to their house. Thinking they had gone there instead, we ran toward the playground. We looked around, calling their names, but again, nothing. The park was completely empty. Confused, we went back inside and headed straight to Natalie's room, expecting to find everyone awake, maybe playing games or watching a movie. But when we opened the door, they were all asleep. The TV was still on, playing a movie quietly in the background. We looked at each other, unsure of what to think. Maybe we had just imagined the sounds. Feeling tired, we went back to Danielle's room and got into bed, deciding to forget about swimming and just sleep. But just as we were drifting off, we heard it again. Laughter, splashing. The sound of people talking, though we couldn't make out what they were saying. At first, we ignored it, thinking it was just the movie in Natalie's room. But then, something felt off. I sat up and looked out the window. The pool was still and empty. No one was there. Wanting to stop our minds from playing tricks on us, I told Danielle I'd go turn off the TV in Natalie's room, just to be sure. I walked back, turned it off, and climbed back into bed, feeling relieved. Then once again, splashing, laughter. Danielle whispered, "You did turn it off, right?" I nodded. We both sat up and looked out the window again. This time, the pool lights were on, casting a soft glow over the water. We figured maybe the girls had woken up to swim after all. But now, we weren't in the mood anymore. Instead, we decided to just sit by the window and talk to them from upstairs. But as we looked closer, a chill ran through me. The water was moving. We could hear laughter, but there was no one there. Then the pool lights flickered and shut off. Everything went dark. A second later, the motion-activated light by the back door clicked on. Our eyes widened as we saw something that made our stomachs drop. Wet footprints leading from the pool straight into the house. Still trying to stay calm, we thought maybe it was Danielle's little brother, Andrew, playing a prank. Determined to catch him in the act, we ran downstairs and hid behind the kitchen island. From there, we had a clear view of the back door. We waited quietly, listening, expecting to see someone walk by so we could jump out and scare them. But no one came. Instead, a sudden, loud clanging noise rang through the kitchen. The pots and pans hanging on the rack above the stove started shaking wildly, banging against each other as if something unseen was moving them. Within seconds, everyone in the house came running downstairs. Natalie, Andrew, their friends, even their parents. The moment they appeared, the noise stopped. The kitchen fell into complete silence. Their parents looked at us confused. What's going on? We tried to explain everything. The sounds, the empty pool, the footprints, the way the pans moved by themselves. But they just shook their heads, saying it was probably all the scary movies we had been watching. We wanted to believe them. We really did. The rest of the night passed without anything strange happening, and by morning, we started to think maybe we had just imagined it all. But when we stepped outside, we realized something was very wrong. The backyard was a mess. All the patio furniture had been tossed around. Pool toys were scattered everywhere, some in the water, others thrown across the yard. It looked as if a storm had blown through, except the night had been completely calm. We started cleaning up so Marshmallow could go outside, but when everything was back in place, Marshy refused to step out the door. His ears were back, his tail tucked between his legs. When we tried to pick him up and set him outside, he growled, something he never did, and when we finally got him to the doorstep, he immediately clawed at the door, whining and scratching to get back in. That was enough for us. We took him for a walk in the park instead. A little while later, my parents came to pick me up. As I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened that night wasn't just in our heads. And to this day, I still wonder who or what was in that pool. This happened just a few hours ago, around 3 a.m. I had gone to sleep earlier at 8 p.m., but woke up at midnight, feeling completely awake, not in the mood to try sleeping again right away. I spent some time browsing the internet, listening to music, and watching YouTube videos on my phone. 3 hours passed like that, and eventually, I decided it was time to try again. I locked my phone, placed it beside my pillow, and turned onto my side. Now I have a habit of sleeping in weird positions, ones that are comfortable for me, but probably wouldn't make sense to anyone else. Sometimes I hug my long pillow at odd angles. Other times I stretch my leg up against the wall, or I curl up tight in a fetal position. But this time, after shifting around a bit, I found myself lying flat on my stomach, arms tucked under my pillow. It felt oddly comfortable, so I closed my eyes, waiting for sleep to take over. But then, I felt it. A weight pressed down on my back. It was warm, heavy, almost like someone was lying on top of me. I opened my eyes confused. The sensation wasn't painful, just strange. I could feel it covering my torso, the way a person might lean against someone else's back. My skin tingled under the pressure, sending a strange electric-like current through my body. At first, I wasn't scared. I just lay there, blinking into the dark, trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Then, I heard a whisper. It wasn't coming from across the room. It wasn't beside my ear. It felt like the voice was inside me, like the words were slipping directly into my mind. It was light, almost airy, and it sounded feminine, though I wasn't sure. The voice whispered, "The one I want is you." My heart started pounding. A cold rush of adrenaline swept through me, but I wasn't frozen. This wasn't like sleep paralysis, something I've dealt with before. Usually, during those episodes, I can't move at all. I feel trapped, unable to shake myself awake, like the darkness itself was holding me down. But this was different. I could still move. I wiggled my toes, shifted my arms slightly. The weight was still there. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself up, turning onto my back. As I moved, the pressure faded. It didn't lift suddenly. It just dissolved. The warmth disappeared, and yet the sensation didn't leave completely. A strange tingling remained, running down my spine like tiny jolts of electricity. It wasn't painful, just unsettling. I lay there in the dark, my chest rising and falling in quick, uneven breaths. My skin was damp with sweat. My hands felt cold. I wasn't terrified, exactly. More like shocked, completely thrown off by what had just happened. My body was still buzzing with leftover energy, and there was no way I was about to close my eyes again. I grabbed my phone, turned it back on, and stayed up for the rest of the night, not even thinking about trying to sleep. Because whatever that was, I didn't want it to come back. And now I can't stop wondering. What did it mean? The one I want is you. What did it want? My energy? My soul? My life? I know this sounds bizarre, like something straight out of a horror story. But I swear, this really happened. I'm not trying to make up a creepy tale or get attention. I just need to understand. If anyone has an idea, please tell me. My brother's house was old, built in 1908 in San Francisco. Before my family moved in, we had the place renovated. The garage was converted into 2 bedrooms, and there was already a room downstairs with a bathroom. To give you an idea of the layout, there were 3 bedrooms downstairs and 2 upstairs. The living room, kitchen, and another bathroom were also upstairs. When you entered the house from the front door, you had to go up a set of stairs right into the living room. My dad's room was on the left, once my parents' room before they divorced. Next to his room was my older brother's, and across from that was the bathroom. The kitchen sat between my brother's room and the bathroom, with a door leading to the back stairs that took you down to the 3 bedrooms below. To get to my younger sister's and my bedroom, you had to go through the hallway downstairs. My older sister's room was next to ours, and my other older brother's room could be accessed through hers or from the front of the house. I hope that makes sense. Things started happening after my mom moved out. And no, I wasn't upset about my parents' divorce. My mom wasn't exactly the kindest person, and to be honest, I was relieved for my dad. They should have split up long before they did, but looking back, I wonder if that was when everything changed. One night, I was home alone. I don't remember where everyone else was. My cousin and his wife stopped by for a visit, and after chatting for a while, they headed out. I walked them to the door, turned off the living room light, and went downstairs to my bedroom. Just as I was settling in, my phone rang. It was my cousin. "Are you upstairs waving at us?" he asked. I frowned. "No, I'm downstairs." "Why?" He hesitated. "Stop playing. You're upstairs, right?" I got up, pulled the blinds open, and looked out at them from my downstairs window. "I'm right here. What are you talking about?" I'll never forget the way his voice shook when he said, "Someone's in your living room window. They were waving at us." My stomach dropped. I told them it wasn't funny. I was home alone. My cousin, now clearly freaked out, told me to come outside immediately. When I did, we all looked up at the window together. The light was still on, but no one was there. I don't remember what happened after that. Maybe I pushed it to the back of my mind, but I never told my family about it. My cousin and his wife insisted, "Your place is haunted." I just shrugged, pretending it was a joke, even though they were dead serious. But things didn't stop there. I remember getting ready in the upstairs bathroom one day. I heard someone whispering outside the door, asking me to hurry up. Figuring it was one of my sisters, I called back, "Hold on." But there was no response. No knocking, just soft whispering. It kept happening again and again. Annoyed, I finally yanked the door open to tell them to wait. No one was there. I checked the living room, the kitchen. Nothing. I convinced myself I was just hearing things, but the whispering came back. This time they called my name. I refused to open the door again, instead telling myself, there's nothing there, just ignore it. But deep down, I knew I wasn't imagining it. The strange occurrences weren't limited to the bathroom. At night, when my younger sister was already asleep, I would lie in bed, trying to drift off. That's when I'd hear it, the handle on the computer desk rattling. I'd sit up, nothing there. I'd lie back down. The sound would start again. It went on like this night after night, until I started waiting for daylight just to fall asleep. My younger sister never heard anything, but there was one night when she admitted I had scared her. She told me I had sat up in bed, staring straight ahead, unblinking. She spoke to me, but I didn't respond. Then, without a word, I just lay back down and went to sleep. She said she stayed awake for a long time after that, too afraid to close her eyes before me. Then there was the roaring sound. It happened one afternoon while I was trying to nap. I had just closed my eyes when I heard it. This deep, low growl circling my head. When I opened my eyes, it stopped. I shut my eyes again. The sound returned. It happened over and over. I started to wonder if it had something to do with a blue lion statue by the window. Eventually, I got rid of it. After that, the roaring stopped. I don't know if it was the statue or just a coincidence. The scariest nights were the ones where I woke up and couldn't move. I'd feel something coming toward me, something heavy, something dark. I'd try to scream, but no sound would come out. I'd struggle, panic rising, and just before it reached me, I'd break free, gasping awake. Sometimes, it felt like it was pressing on my chest. Was it sleep paralysis? Or was there really something there? There was another time when I woke up and felt something sitting at the end of my bed. This time, though, it didn't feel bad. When I looked, I saw a woman in white. She didn't scare me. I even managed to fall back asleep. But before that, I had seen something else. A black figure, sitting in the exact same spot. That one felt different. That one felt evil. I told my dad about everything. He told me to ignore it. My mom, on the other hand, had a different theory. She believed that all of this started because she wasn't around anymore. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but now I wonder, was she right? She took me to a temple to get blessed. A monk gave me a beaded bracelet, but I never wore it. I've never liked things around my wrist. She later took me to a woman who claimed to sense spirits. The woman told me there was more than one ghost around me. She said they wanted something from me, something I needed to do for them. If I didn't, she warned, they'd get angry. I didn't believe her. I thought she just wanted money. She gave me a yellow paper with red writing and told me to put it on my door. I did, but nothing changed. Eventually, I started sleeping in the living room in front of the Buddha altar. I felt safe there. I'd hear noises from the dresser near my dad's room, but whatever it was, it never came close. I stayed there for about 2 weeks before going back to my room. The activity never stopped completely, but I learned to block it out. And then I moved out. I thought it was over. But sometimes, even now, I still feel it, that strange presence. A shadow in the corner of my vision, a whisper just out of earshot. Was it all in my head, or did something follow me? I still don't know. I'm 21 now, but this happened when I was 14. At the time, I lived in a small 2-bedroom house in San Diego, California, with my mom, her boyfriend, and my 3 sisters. That house had been in our family for 3 generations, and over the years, strange things happened there. One weekend, my mom and I were home cleaning when I suddenly heard her scream my name. Her voice was urgent, panicked. I ran to her room and found her on her knees, crying. She was still in her robe, clutching something in her hands. I froze. Mom, what's wrong? She looked up at me, her face pale. I was looking through my dresser, and I found this. She held up a white envelope. It had my Uncle Alonzo's name written on it. My uncle had passed away a few years before. I didn't understand why she was so upset. Okay, so Tears streamed down her face. I gave this envelope to him, weeks before he died. It was full of money. That got my attention. "Did you put it in there?" she asked. I shook my head. No. She locked her bedroom door every day before work. Always. My sisters and I had a habit of going through her stuff, so she made sure we couldn't. There was no way we had put it there. When my sisters and my mom's boyfriend got home, we asked them. None of them had ever seen that envelope before. That was the first time my mom cried over something unexplainable. But it wouldn't be the last. After that, weird things started happening all the time. Whenever we were watching TV, it would randomly turn off. The radio would change stations by itself. At first, we were scared, but my sisters started making a joke out of it. "Okay, Tio Alonzo, turn it back," they'd say. And sometimes, it actually would. At night, things got even stranger. I'd be lying in bed, trying to sleep, when I'd feel my blankets tugging, like someone was gently pulling them away. I'd wake up in the middle of the night over and over, hearing soft whistling. I never had the courage to get up and look. To this day, I wish I had. But the moment that stuck with me the most happened right before we moved from San Diego to Chula Vista. It was early, 5 a.m. Our usual routine. Everyone was up, getting ready for school. I went into the bathroom to brush my hair and teeth. As soon as I closed the door, bang. Loud knocking. Kicking. Like someone was trying to get in. My heart jumped. I swung the door open. No one was there. I stepped out, looking around. My family was in the kitchen and living room, going about their morning as if nothing had happened. I asked each of them, one by one, if they had knocked on the door. They all said no. I tried to tell them what happened, but they just laughed, saying I was imagining things. So I never mentioned it again. But I still think about it. And sometimes I wonder if Tio Alonzo wasn't the only one in that house. Even though I had moved out of the horror house, I still visited frequently. Over the last few years, though, life got busy, and I found myself visiting less and less. The past 2 years, I hadn't been back at all. So this year, I made a promise to change that. The first holiday I would spend there, Halloween. Ever since the failed seance of Madame M in 2001 led to a very real encounter, we had embraced the spooky side of the house. Every year, we went all out, jack-o'-lanterns lining the steps, green lights casting an eerie glow over the front yard, and the occasional plastic tombstone tucked into the grass. The house had become a neighborhood favorite for trick-or-treaters. There was even a local rumor about pranksters being followed home and haunted afterward. We never denied that rumor. The house was at its most beautiful in the fall. Trees bursting with color, leaves carpeting the yard, the air rich with the scent of chimney smoke. Autumn had always felt safe here, the house at its gentlest. I had so many fond memories of this time of year that I decided to take a few vacation days and visit early. I arrived on October 3, 2013, and was greeted by the added chaos of construction. After decades without a garage, my mom had decided to rebuild the old carriage house that had burned down in the 1970s. The foundation stones were still charred from the fire, a quiet reminder of the past. Now, alongside the usual piles of autumn leaves, the yard was cluttered with timber stacks and bags of concrete. That first night was a blur of conversation, talking about life, my job, my mom's plans for the house. We stayed up until midnight before finally heading to bed. As I lay there, I realized I was hoping to hear the familiar sounds of footsteps in the hallway, sounds I had become accustomed to during my years living there. By 1 a.m., nostalgia faded into fatigue, and I drifted into a light, restless sleep. Then, at 4 a.m., I woke up. A strange sensation settled over me, the feeling that I was no longer alone. I turned to the clock beside my bed, 4:03 a.m. Slowly, I turned my head toward the open doorway, staring into the pitch-black hallway. I couldn't see anything, but I felt it, something standing just beyond the darkness. Not watching me, though. It was facing the guest room across the hall. I waited, barely breathing, the heavy silence pressing against me. Finally, I whispered, "Hello?" No response. The stillness remained unchanged. I tried again, slightly louder this time. "Hello?" Nothing. I sat up, pulling the covers off, but as soon as I moved, the presence in the hallway faded, like smoke dissipating into the air. By the time I reached the doorway, the feeling was completely gone. But something else caught my attention. A faint whispering coming from the guest room across the hall. I stood there listening. The longer I focused, the more convinced I became that the voice was repeating the same word over and over again. One, 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 one. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost like chanting. I crept forward, carefully avoiding the creaky floorboards. When I reached the door, I placed my hand on the knob and started to turn it. Instant silence. I pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The room was empty, but the temperature had dropped. The air was much colder here than in the hallway. I took a deep breath. "Hello?" Nothing. I stood there for a moment, waiting, half expecting something to respond, but the silence was absolute. Eventually, I turned off the light and went back to my room, lying awake, trying to make sense of what had just happened. That's when a thought struck me. What if whatever had been standing in the hallway wasn't just there? What if it had been listening to the same whispers I had heard? I thought about the house's long history, searching for some kind of connection. But before I could come to any conclusions, sleep pulled me under. Underscore 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 underscore. The next morning, I told my mom what had happened. She wasn't surprised, but admitted she hadn't experienced anything like it while living here alone. Something else was weighing on me, though. The house had always felt alive, mischievous even, but now it felt empty, almost sad. It wasn't something I could explain. It was just this quiet, lingering absence. Every time I passed an empty room, the feeling settled in my chest like a weight. My mom noticed it too. She told me the house had been built for a large family, and now, with just her living there, it felt like wasted space. I hesitated before asking if she was considering selling, but she assured me she wasn't. The eerie feeling aside, we enjoyed our time together. Each night before bed, I listened for the whispering in the guest room, but it never came back. On the third night, though, I heard something else. Footsteps. They started at the stairwell, moved down the hallway, and passed right by my room. For some reason, that sound was comforting. The next day, one of the local kids my mom had hired to do yard work was outside clearing leaves and pulling weeds. After dark, he came inside to collect his pay. I left him in the front hallway for only a minute while I grabbed the money. When I returned, I found him frozen in the parlor doorway, staring at something. His face had gone pale. "Hey," I called. He jumped, visibly shaken. His hands were trembling. Without taking his eyes off the parlor wall, he lifted a shaky finger and pointed at the portrait. It was an old photograph of Henry Butler Sr., the man who had built this house over 100 years ago, the first man to die here. The boy finally turned to me, his voice unsteady. The lips, he said, they were moving. He was talking to me. I stared at the portrait. The face was still. The lips were frozen in time. I turned back to the boy. What did he say? He shook his head. I don't know. I couldn't hear anything. But he was, looking right at me, like he was trying to tell me something. I handed him his money and asked if he would be coming back tomorrow. He said nothing. He turned and walked straight out the door. He never returned. Over the next few days, I spent a lot of time in the guest room, asking questions, listening for anything. But the whispers never came back. Neither did the boy. There were no more strange occurrences for the rest of my visit. but I plan to return on October 29 to spend Halloween here with my mom. I still don't understand why these things never happened while I was living here. But next time, I'll be paying much closer attention, because I have a feeling that whatever was here is still waiting. My husband and I were newlyweds when this happened. We had spent weeks searching for a place of our own before finally finding a cozy little condo in Rockland. It was small, but perfect for us. A 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit with a quaint kitchen, dining area, and family room. It even had a fireplace and a balcony overlooking a large, mature tree. The condo community was quiet, and our unit was on the top floor of a 2-story building. It felt like the perfect place to start our new life together. We signed the papers, moved in, and settled into our new home. It was my first time moving out of my parents' house, which honestly was a relief. Their house had always been active, but that's a story for another time. My husband, let's call him Harry, and I each claimed our own bathrooms. He took the one in our bedroom, and I took the smaller one across from the second bedroom. I didn't get any strange feelings about the condo at first. It felt peaceful, quiet. Then, something strange started happening in my bathroom. At first, it was just a small mess on the mirror, one that seemed to appear overnight. The mirror in my bathroom was huge, covering most of the wall. It was when I sat on the toilet, facing away from it, that I first noticed the spots. White, powdery droplets like someone had flicked toothpaste or water onto the glass. I assumed it was Harry. Annoyed, I asked him why he was using my bathroom and making a mess. But he swore he hadn't. He had never brushed his teeth in there. And even if he had, why would he stand over the toilet instead of the sink? It didn't make sense. Still, I cleaned it up and forgot about it. The next morning, the same dried droplets were back. Every day, no matter how much I wiped them away, more appeared. And not just a few, a lot. Even stranger, streaks started forming, like water had slowly dripped down the mirror before drying. I tried everything to explain it. Maybe it was the toilet, but the lid was always down. Maybe it was the shower, but we never used it. Maybe it was plumbing issues, but there were none. I couldn't figure it out. Harry wasn't worried. He joked that if it was a ghost, it wasn't hurting us. It was just messy. So we nicknamed it the brushing spirit. Whoever or whatever was doing this seemed to be sitting on the toilet, facing the mirror, brushing their teeth. It became a routine. I started tracking the spots, writing down when they appeared. On multiple occasions, I would leave the bathroom, wait a few minutes, then come back, only to find new droplets had appeared. They never smelled like anything. They wiped away easily. I never dared to taste them because, well, I wasn't that curious. The one thing I knew, it unnerved me. A few months later, we adopted a cat, a sweet little thing we named Udon. That's when Harry started experiencing things. One day, while I was at work, he texted me saying he had seen a glowing white orb outside, floating through the tree in front of our balcony. He described it as the size of a tennis ball, bright, solid, and moving erratically. It weaved through the branches before suddenly zipping out of sight. Then, while showering, he saw something even stranger. A small black orb, about the size of a marble, appeared in front of him. It twisted in the air, spiraling upward before vanishing over the shower curtain. I only saw an orb once. I was home alone, cooking dinner, and couldn't find a spice I needed. Frustrated, I looked up from the cabinet, and right in front of me, a black marble-sized orb was zipping around. At first, I thought it was a fly, but it didn't make a sound. And then, it just disappeared. Not long after, Harry saw something else. One night, he got up for a glass of water. The moonlight was bright, so he didn't bother turning on any lights. As he stepped into the kitchen, he saw a cat sitting at the end of the hallway. He assumed it was Udon, but when he got back to bed, he realized Udon had been with me the entire time. The ghost cat showed itself again while he was doing laundry. Our washer and dryer were in a small outdoor laundry room off the balcony. While folding clothes, he suddenly felt a cat rub against his leg. Soft fur, a solid weight. Panicked, he looked down, thinking Udon had escaped. Nothing was there. He searched the small laundry space, but there was nowhere for a cat to hide. That was the moment I knew I wanted out. At 7 months, my mood shifted. I felt on edge, angry, like I was constantly being watched. I didn't like the condo anymore. Even my parents noticed the change. My mom, being the generous person she is, suggested that Harry and I sell the condo and move closer to them. With their help, we put it on the market and started looking for a house. That's when things escalated. One night, heavy footsteps pounded up and down our small hallway. Fast. Too fast. Whatever it was, it stopped right at our doorway. Again. And again. And again. Harry, still in the bathroom, didn't hear it. I did. I knew what I heard. And that was the final straw. We packed as quickly as we could and moved into my parents' house while we finished selling the condo. On our last night there, something truly unsettling happened. There was a small attic door in Harry's bathroom, right above the toilet. It was stuck shut. I had tried to open it out of curiosity before, but it was too heavy. That night, I went to the bathroom and froze. The attic door was open, not cracked, not loose, wide, open. The space above was pitch black. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I didn't say anything to Harry until we were getting into bed. When he took off his shirt, I gasped. His back was covered in scratches, long, red, angry scratches. He hadn't felt them. They didn't hurt, but they were there. I was furious at whatever had done this. Harry told me not to engage, not to give it attention. The next morning, we left for good. Before we did, we spoke to the ghost cat. We told it to move on, that its owner had loved it, but she had moved to a new home. I hope the spirit found peace. I don't know what was haunting that condo, but I do know one thing. I was glad to leave it behind. In 2008, my wife and I bought our first home together, a brand new house in a recently developed neighborhood. It was everything we wanted, a beautiful 2-story, 3-bedroom house. It was small but perfect for starting our family. We talked about children often, and in January of 2010, our son was born. My wife would sometimes talk about how much she wished her grandfather, Papa, had lived long enough to meet him. Papa had a way with children. No matter how fussy or restless they were, they always seemed to calm in his presence. She would say it with a kind of quiet longing, but at the time, our son was too young to understand who Papa was. He was an early bloomer, walking on his own by 8 months and speaking in full, clear sentences by his first birthday. At that point, we had never mentioned Papa to him, nor had anyone else in the family. In our living room, we have a sectional couch. To the left of it sits a recliner, and between them is a lamp with 3 shelves. On the 3rd shelf, standing quietly among a few other small items, is a small urn containing some of Papa's ashes. One afternoon, just before our son's first birthday, he toddled up to the lamp, smiling widely. He pointed to the urn and without hesitation said, "Papa. There's Papa." His voice was so sure, so matter-of-fact, that a chill ran down my spine. My experiences with the paranormal had always been unsettling, not comforting. But something about this moment felt different. Even now, years later, my son still occasionally refers to Papa, sometimes even saying, "I love Papa." The thought that such a beloved, kind-hearted man might still be watching over our home, my wife, and our child gave me an unexpected sense of comfort. I am not a particularly religious person. Most would consider me agnostic, though I align more closely with deism. But I like the idea of someone looking after the spiritual side of our home while I took care of the physical. 2 years later, right around my son's 2nd birthday, my mother came to visit. She tries to make the trip every January from Florida. My whole life, I have known her to be sensitive to things most people cannot perceive. This time, she was struggling with her health, particularly her respiratory system, due to a new medication she had started taking. One night, I woke to the sound of her stirring in her sleep. At first, I thought she was having a nightmare. I went into the guest bedroom and gently shook her awake. She thanked me drowsily and quickly drifted back into a peaceful sleep. The next morning, she told me what had happened. She had been struggling to breathe, feeling as if something was pressing on her chest. Then, in her dream, she saw the figure of a tall man standing at the foot of her bed. He had no distinct features, but she could sense his presence. Though she was frightened at first, she quickly realized that he meant no harm. The figure moved toward her, gently touching her foot in a soothing motion. Then he walked around to the right side of the bed, resting his hand lightly on her arm and chest. Never intrusive, only comforting. He repeated this several times, easing her discomfort. That was when I had come in and woken her. When she finished telling me the story, I asked her to show me exactly where in the room the figure had disappeared. She walked over and stood in the far corner, right next to the head of the bed on the right side. My mind started piecing it together immediately. That exact spot was directly above where Papa's urn sat in the living room. Then I considered something else. My mother has severe rheumatoid arthritis, the kind that affects the entire body, and in some cases can be life-threatening. This visit, in particular, had been hard on her. She had been struggling with pain in her feet, ankles, elbows, and because of her respiratory issues, her sternum as well. The next day, after her experience, the pain in her joints had faded to a dull ache. By the time she went to bed that night, it was completely gone. Even her breathing had returned to normal. That night, before going to sleep, I went to the urn and gently touched it. "Thank you, Papa," I whispered. Whether or not I could explain it, I knew what I believed. Someone was still watching over my family. It all started a few years ago when we lived in a different house, not far from where we are now. My son, who was 5 at the time, began experiencing night terrors. They were so extreme that there was nothing I could do except hold him and wait for them to pass. Night terrors are nothing like regular nightmares. The person appears to be awake, but they are trapped in something far more terrifying. In my son's case, he would sit upright in bed, trembling, his eyes wide with fear, and point toward the bedroom door, screaming in horror. "It's right there," he would cry. And just as suddenly as it started, he would collapse back onto his pillow, back into deep sleep. The next day, he would remember nothing. But months later, the memories would come back to him. He would recall hearing footsteps in the hallway, going to check, and seeing a black, shapeless figure slowly making its way toward his room. Terrified, he would run back to his bed, throw the blankets over himself, and pray for it to go away. He told me, "Mommy, it was the blackest black I've ever seen. It stood at the foot of my bed and just stared at me. I thought it was going to eat me." Hearing those words from my small child sent chills down my spine. I told him it was just a bad dream. I gave him a dream catcher, hoping it would bring him some comfort. It didn't help. Now he's 11, and though the experiences aren't as frequent, they still happen. We moved into our current house nearly 3 years ago. At first, everything seemed fine. No strange feelings, no uneasy energy. But I did notice flickers of shadows in my peripheral vision. Quick, fleeting movements that disappeared when I turned my head. I brushed them off, until my husband saw something. Now my husband is a skeptic. He's logical, analytical, and works in law enforcement. He doesn't entertain the idea of ghosts. That's why when he brought it up, I listened. One morning, he casually mentioned, "Something weird happened last night." He had woken up in the middle of the night, adjusting his sleeping position, when he noticed a tall, solid black figure standing in our bedroom doorway. It was darker than the rest of the room, blacker than the darkness itself. We laughed it off at first. Maybe it was just his imagination, half asleep in the dark. But months later, he told me he saw it again, this time in our bathroom. He said the figure stood still for a moment, then glided toward my side of the bed and disappeared. That unsettled me. I was still catching flickers of movement in my peripheral vision. The strange noises in the house were getting more frequent. Little knocks, distant bangs, small things, but enough to make me wonder. Then came the night I heard it. My husband was at work. My son was in his room playing video games. I was in bed watching a movie when he came in and asked for a slice of cake. I told him I'd get us both a piece once the movie was over. When it ended, I turned off the TV, got up, and called for him to meet me in the kitchen. By this time, the house was silent. As I cut the cake, I heard it. A faint gurgling. I stopped. The sound grew louder. A deep, guttural noise that morphed into a growl. My body went cold. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't coming from the TV. Then it turned into a roar. It was inside the house. The sound lasted for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. I stood there, frozen, my brain scrambling to process what I was hearing. My son turned to me, wide-eyed. What was that? I wanted to tell him I didn't know, but I had no explanation. It was the deepest, most agonized sound I had ever heard. He tried to rationalize it. Maybe you left your TV on. I shook my head. No, everything's off. Maybe my game was still playing, but his game was paused. I had no answers, and that terrified me. After he finished his cake, I did a sweep of the house. I found nothing. No intruders, no sign of anything out of place. The only thing I noticed was that the closet light in my bedroom was on, the same closet where the attic door was. I didn't sleep well that night. Weeks passed. We carried on as if nothing had happened. Then, like before, my husband had another sighting. This time, the figure was shorter. No hat. No coat. Just a dark mass with glowing eyes. He said it stood at my side of the bed watching. He didn't move. He didn't panic. Instead, he willed it away. He told it, in his mind, that it was not welcome here. It disappeared. I didn't know what disturbed me more, the fact that something was in our house or the fact that my husband, the skeptic, was seeing it. Then, the attic noises started. Loud thumps in the middle of the night. The sound of wood falling onto the floor. My husband checked, but the attic was empty. Still, the noises continued. Then came the dreams. One night, I had a lucid dream. I was standing in my bedroom doorway, looking at myself and my husband asleep in bed. I realized I could control the dream, so I decided to float. I drifted above the bed, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. Then it went wrong. I lost control. My body flipped upside down. I felt myself being pushed into the bed. A force pressed my head deeper into the mattress. I could feel the fabric against my cheek, as if I was physically there. A buzzing sound filled my ears. Thousands of bees. I tried to force myself awake. My vision flickered between the dream world and reality. When I finally snapped back into my body, I couldn't move. I wasn't alone. I felt something watching me. My body was paralyzed. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing myself to move. Eventually, the feeling passed. I pulled the blankets around me and pressed close to my husband, waiting for sleep to take me again. Then my husband had his own dream. He found himself in the late 1800s, dressed in old, worn clothing. He wasn't himself. He was someone else, reliving their memory. He followed two men into a field and helped them dig a hole, only to realize too late that it was his own grave. They beat him over the head with a shovel, cursed him for being foolish enough to help them, and began to bury him alive. As the earth covered him, he could taste the dirt, feel the weight pressing down. He saw a large oak tree just before everything went dark. After some research, we discovered that this area was once farmland, a resting stop for travelers in the gold rush era. It made us wonder, was someone trying to show us how they died? Was it all connected? And then, 2 weeks ago, I heard footsteps. I was alone in the living room, my husband and son asleep. I heard light, deliberate steps creeping toward me, the carpet fibers shifting under invisible feet. I froze. It sounded like someone was standing right around the corner. I braced myself. My heart pounded. Then I jumped up and ran to confront whoever it was. There was no one there. I don't know what we're dealing with. I don't know what it wants. But I do know one thing. It's still here. I was born in 1962 in San Diego. My parents had always been fascinated by the paranormal. It wasn't just a passing interest. They actively sought it out, reading about supernatural encounters, watching documentaries, and discussing things that most people would dismiss as fantasy. It was just a part of who they were. When I was 13, they got a Ouija board. I remember how excited they were to try it, treating it like a fun new game. They wasted no time in using it, laughing as the planchette moved beneath their fingers, asking questions and eagerly waiting for answers. But something changed. At some point, the excitement disappeared. They stopped using the board altogether. Their moods darkened, their faces always tense. They were anxious, jumpy even, and within a few weeks, they burned the board. They never told me why. I didn't ask. I had my own secrets to keep. By then, I had fallen in love with my best friend, and in the 1970s, that wasn't something I could talk about. She and I were both girls, and I knew my parents wouldn't understand. I spent as much time away from home as I could, avoiding their moods and the weight of the things they wouldn't say. What I didn't realize back then was that something else had already made itself known. By the time I was 14, I started staying home more often, finally comfortable enough to invite my girlfriend over. But my parents were distant, not just emotionally, but almost as if they weren't fully present in their own lives. They spoke less, rarely looked at each other, and carried a constant air of exhaustion. The house itself felt different, heavy, like something unseen had settled in. That's when I started noticing things. It began subtly. Kitchen cabinets that I had just closed would be wide open the next time I walked in. Objects moved on their own, never where I had left them. My parents' moods would swing from silent detachment to sudden frustration, and my cat, who had always been fearless, would sometimes freeze, staring at something I couldn't see, then bolt out of the room. One day, I skipped school with my girlfriend, and we decided to hang out at my house. She went to my room while I went to the kitchen to get her a drink. As I poured it, something moved past me. A shadow, quick and silent, disappearing behind the tall closet in the hallway. At the same time, a book fell from the shelf. I frowned, unsettled. Then I heard my girlfriend's voice. She was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. When I walked back into my room, she was sitting on my bed, her face pale, eyes wide. "What did you say?" I asked. She shook her head, staring at me. "You were just standing there." I blinked. "What?" "You were standing in the doorway." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You weren't saying anything, just standing there with your back to me. I called your name a few times, but you didn't move. And then you stepped forward, and you disappeared." A chill ran down my spine. "I was in the kitchen," I said slowly. "No," she whispered. "I saw you, but it wasn't me. Something that looked like me had been standing in that doorway." After that, the activity escalated. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision. Small objects shifted on their own. Once, while sitting in the living room, a basketball rolled toward us, slowly, deliberately. I tried to talk to my parents about it, desperate for some kind of explanation, but they shut me down immediately. They told me I was imagining things, that I was being dramatic, that I was on drugs. I wasn't. But every time I brought it up, it turned into a fight. They wouldn't hear it. And the more they ignored it, the worse things got. The house felt suffocating, not just because of the strange occurrences, but because of the constant tension. My parents no longer looked at each other with warmth. They barely spoke unless they had to. Whatever had been between them before, the love, the closeness, it was gone. By the time I turned 18, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed my bags and left. My girlfriend and I moved into our own apartment, just a few miles away. For the first time in years, I felt free, and for a while, nothing happened. No shadows, no movement, no eerie weight pressing down on the air. At first, I thought maybe I had imagined it all. Maybe my parents were right. Maybe it had just been in my head. But then, as the years passed, I started to wonder. If it was all in my head, why had my parents changed so suddenly? Why had they burned the Ouija board? And most importantly, why had they refused to talk about it? They had always loved the paranormal. They had always sought it out. But something had terrified them enough to never touch it again. And yet, instead of trying to get rid of it, instead of protecting me from it, they left me to live with it. I still don't understand. Maybe I never will. But I can't help but wonder if whatever they invited in that day never truly left. Maybe it attached itself to them. Maybe it attached itself to our house. Or maybe, just maybe, it had been waiting for me. When I was in the 4th grade, my family moved to a new town and to a brand new house. I was so excited to leave our old place behind and start fresh. The best part was getting to pick my own room. I chose one that was way bigger than my old one, and I couldn't wait to make it mine. Not long after we settled in, my mom told me I could invite a friend over for a sleepover. I was thrilled and asked my best friend at the time, let's call her Maria, to stay the night. She was the brave one between us, always the one to calm me down when I got scared, the one who'd walk with me to the bathroom at night when I was too afraid to go alone. That night, we set up our beds. My twin bed was too small for both of us, so she slept on an air mattress next to me. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to her crying and shaking. She kept saying she wanted to go home. Right now. I didn't understand. She had never been scared of anything before. It hurt a little, and I remember wondering why she suddenly didn't want to stay. My mom called her mom, and she left. We tried again a few times, but the same thing kept happening. She would panic, cry, and refuse to stay. Eventually, we gave up on sleepovers at my house. I started staying over at her place instead, and everything was completely fine. My mom told me it was probably just because our house was new, but even back then, I had a feeling that wasn't it. A new place had never bothered her before. After a while, Maria stopped calling and didn't want to play after school anymore either. I figured it was just because I had moved and started a new school. My mom told me that's just how things go sometimes. But looking back, after everything that happened in that house, I think I finally understand why she never felt comfortable there. It wasn't just her. None of my friends ever did. A week after we moved in, something strange happened. My family was getting wood floors installed to replace the carpet, and our cat, Miss Kitty, was always outside watching everything from a distance. She was an outdoor cat and liked it that way. Then, one morning, we found her lying on the front porch. She was gone. She wasn't old. She wasn't sick. It didn't make sense. I was heartbroken, but my mom told me maybe the move had been too much for her. I wanted to believe that, but deep down, it felt odd. Nothing really happened to me until I was in 7th or 8th grade. One night, I was watching TV in the loft. My mom was downstairs on the phone, and my dad, who was a police officer, was working late. I was alone up there when I started noticing something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I ignored it. We had dogs, but they were either outside or in the garage, so I knew it wasn't them. But the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like someone was standing just outside my bedroom door, peeking in, then pulling back. It happened again and again. I tried to brush it off, but eventually, I turned my head just in time to see her. A woman. Thin, wearing a yellow dress. She wasn't my mom. My mom didn't even own a dress like that. I just sat there, frozen, staring. She turned her back to me and walked away, right into one of the guest rooms. I finally snapped out of it and called for my mom. When she answered from downstairs, I just told her never mind. Our house had a separate room, kind of like a small guest house, with a bathroom and closet. My mom turned it into her office, and that's where we kept the family computer. I spent so much time in there after school and on weekends, playing The Sims, chatting on AIM, or just browsing online. One Saturday morning, my parents went out for breakfast. They did that a lot, and I loved it because it meant I got the computer to myself for a while. I grabbed some iced tea and a bowl of cereal and settled in for a long, uninterrupted gaming session. At some point, I started smelling something. A cologne. It was strong, expensive smelling, the kind a well-dressed man might wear. I actually liked it. For a second, I even wondered what brand it was. Then it hit me. I was alone. I spun around so fast, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but there was no one. I checked the tiny bathroom. The closet was too small to hide in, but I checked that too. Nothing. I tried to shake it off and went back to my game. The smell faded until it came back, even stronger, like someone was standing right behind me. That was it. I bolted back to the main house. When my mom got home, I told her about it. My dad laughed, said I had a wild imagination, but my mom, she just looked at me and said, "I've smelled it too." Over the years, more strange things happened. Both my mom and I would hear voices, somewhere in the house, talking, calling out. We'd answer, thinking it was the other person, only to realize neither of us had said anything. When family members passed away, I would wake up throughout the night and see figures moving through the house, walking up and down the stairs, drifting through the dining room, stepping out the front door. That's why, even now, I always sleep with my door closed. The scariest thing that ever happened to me was in the middle of the night. I almost never wake up to use the bathroom, but that night, I had to go so bad that I had no choice. I felt weird even stepping out of my bed, like something was watching me. I hurried to the bathroom, did what I needed to do, flushed, and washed my hands. That's when I felt it. Something brushed past me. I froze. My heart was pounding. I turned toward the door, ready to rush back to my room, when suddenly I felt breath on the back of my neck. And then I heard it. A long, slow sigh. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my bed with the lights on, the TV turned up. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. My mom had her own experiences too. She sometimes slept in the guest room because my dad snored so loudly it kept her up. She never liked being in there though. Even during the day, she felt uneasy. One night, she was in bed reading. Eventually, she got tired, turned off the light, and started to fall asleep. Then she heard it, a quiet laugh. At first, she thought it was me, maybe watching TV or talking to a friend. She didn't think much of it, but then something rolled across the bed and landed beside her. A flashlight. It had been sitting on the dresser. And then she heard the laugh again. But this time, it ended in a gasp. She never slept in that room again. A year ago, we finally moved out. My parents split, and we sold the house. Looking back, there were just too many things, big and small, that made it hard to call that place home. I don't know what was in that house, but whatever it was, it never really felt like it belonged to us. What do you think? Have you ever experienced anything like this? When I was around 12, I spent the night at my Aunt Mary's house in Los Angeles. It wasn't something I liked doing. I had heard too many stories about that place, and I've always believed in ghosts. But for some reason, I still went. My aunt lived in a big, old, two-story house that had a separate back house divided into apartments. She and her husband, Philip, lived in the front portion with their two daughters, Kimberly and Yvette. The house belonged to Philip's father, Bob, who had lived there for years before moving out and renting it to family members. My aunt doesn't live there anymore. The house had a strange history. Bob's wife once told my aunt that before they remodeled it, it had been a crack house. A fire had burned part of it down, taking the life of a homeless man who was inside. There weren't any official records because the Los Angeles Records building had burned down long ago, taking all the documents with it. It was also rumored that an elderly woman who lived upstairs practiced voodoo or witchcraft, and that's what people in the family blamed for everything that happened there. My aunt had told me many times about the strange things she had experienced, and she wasn't the only one. Even family members who didn't live there had their own stories. That night, I shared the top bunk with my cousin Yvette. Kimberly slept on the bottom, and my aunt's bed was right across from us. I woke up in the middle of the night around 3 in the morning. The room was dark, and the only light came from the window behind my aunt's bed. That house always seemed dark, even during the day, like the light never fully reached inside. As I lay there with my eyes closed, something made me open them. I turned my head slightly toward where my aunt was sleeping, and that's when I saw her. A woman. She was standing right next to the bunk bed, staring at me. Her long black hair hung down, and from the waist up, she was pitch black, like a shadow with solid form. I felt every drop of blood drain from my body. The bunk was tall, which meant she was either incredibly tall or floating. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I tried to pray in my head, but the words came out all wrong, jumbled, and stuttering. I was sweating, terrified, trapped in my own body. Then, out of nowhere, Kimberly mumbled our grandmother's name in her sleep, and just like that, I could move again. I didn't say anything. I just lay there, too scared to breathe, staring around the room. Nothing. But I knew what I had seen. The light from the window had been enough for me to see her clearly. The next morning, I went home and told my mom. She told my aunt, and that's when I learned I wasn't the only one who had seen her. My Uncle Philip had seen her before too, exactly as I had described, standing in the mirror next to him while he was in bed, watching them. He never talked about things like that, never showed fear, but my aunt said he had told her about it. That's how she knew it was real. My cousin Kimberly had seen her too. One night when she got up to go to the restroom, the woman was standing in the far corner of the room, and next to her was the doll. That doll was another story entirely. My cousins had owned a doll that sat on its stomach, with its chin resting on its hands. One night they heard something. A song playing over and over. They followed the sound to a box of toys they kept outside. The next day, my aunt and uncle went to check. There, inside the box, was the doll. It was the same song they had heard all night. But when they picked it up, they realized it had no batteries. They threw the doll away, but later, it showed up in my cousin's room. They threw it out again, this time making sure it was taken with the trash, and they never saw it after that. The house had other strange moments. In the backyard, there were basement doors on the ground that opened outward. Sometimes, for reasons no one really understood, they left them open. One day, while playing outside, my cousin suddenly stopped. Her face went pale, and without saying a word, she ran straight into the house, crying. When she finally spoke, she said she had seen a man standing at the bottom of the basement stairs. My uncle and other family members searched every inch of the basement, but they found nothing. One of the strangest things happened when a water pipe in the house broke. The pipes were buried in the basement walls, so my Uncle Philip and his dad, Bob, had to break into the wall to fix them. As they dug, they found something strange. A glass bottle, like an old wine bottle, sealed shut. Inside was a small doll covered in needles, and wrapped around it was hair. After that, my aunt called a priest to bless the house. Not long after, she bought a home of her own and moved out. She never looked back. I haven't heard anything about the house since, but I know what I saw. And I know, without a doubt, something was wrong with that place. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've lived in Southern California my whole life, and while I've had a few strange experiences, none of them ever felt significant or particularly frightening. That's why this one stood out. Not too long ago, I lived in a 2-bedroom apartment for about 7 years before moving out. The whole time I was there, nothing ever really happened. I never felt anything unusual, and the idea of the place being haunted never even crossed my mind. Much later, someone mentioned that a previous tenant's relative had passed away in one of the bedrooms, but at the time, I never thought much of it. It was late at night, sometime after midnight. My father was watching TV, and I was half watching, half trying to fall asleep. It wasn't working. I was still wide awake when my father suddenly paused the program. He looked startled. "What's that noise?" he asked. At first, I hadn't even noticed it, but once he pointed it out, I heard it too. and the small hallway that connected the rooms in our apartment. Whispers, faint but distinct, filtered through the heater vents built into the walls. The hallway door was cracked open, and the sound carried through. It wasn't just random noise. It sounded like two voices speaking to each other, almost as if they were whispering about us. But no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't make out any words. My father stayed quiet for a moment, listening, then suddenly called out in a firm voice, "Who's there?" Instant silence. The voices stopped immediately, not fading, not continuing, just gone. He went back to his program, and despite being completely terrified, I somehow managed to fall asleep not long after he turned off the TV. But for days afterward, I was uneasy walking through that hallway alone. I later tried to come up with a logical explanation. The only thing I could think of was the computer. Sometimes we would leave it on at night, and if headphones were plugged in, you could faintly hear the audio leaking through. But the computer wasn't in the hallway. The sound had definitely come from there. And the thing that stuck with me the most, the voices stopped the second my father spoke. If it had been a video or something on autoplay, the sound would have continued. It's been about a year since that night, and nothing else has happened. I know what I heard wasn't just my imagination, and my father heard it too. I usually know when my mind is playing tricks on me, and this wasn't one of those times. I don't have an explanation, and I'm not looking for one. I just wanted to share what happened. I'm 15 years old and have lived in Northern California my whole life, in a small town called Yuba City. It's just north of Sacramento, where the gold rush began and changed American history. Not far from here, in our sister city, a major flood in 1955 tore through the area, destroying buildings and taking lives. The levee holding back, the river collapsed, and water rushed in, swallowing the city. After that, a lot of historic buildings were either destroyed or torn down. My grandmother moved to Yuba City in 1956, not long after the flood. Back then, an old creek ran through the area, passing right by the house. Over the years, the city grew, spreading out from farmland into a town of over 60,000 people. But the house, her house, has stayed the same. She's lived there since my dad was just a toddler. He's 45 now. It's a small place with 2 bedrooms, a narrow hallway leading to the bathroom, a tiny kitchen, a back porch, and a big backyard. But ever since my family moved in, strange things have happened. Whatever it is, it's been there for as long as anyone can remember. When my dad was around 10, he was home one night with his older brother. They had been watching a thriller on TV and shut it off when the movie ended. They were just about to say goodnight when the sound of rushing water filled the house. The kitchen faucet had turned on by itself, full blast. There was no wind, no open windows, no one else home. Just the 2 of them staring at each other, too scared to move. Years later, my aunt had her own experience. She was around 12, getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. The door to my grandparents' room was across the hall, and it had been left open. As she turned to go back to bed, she stopped. Right in front of her, the bedroom door slowly swung halfway shut, then froze as if someone had pushed it just enough to peek inside. She stood there, staring, waiting for something else to happen. But the door never moved again. No one was there. No one had ever died in that house, but something still lingered. In March of 1998, 2 months before I was born, my grandfather passed away. Years of drinking and smoking had caught up with him, and he had spent his last weeks in pain. He had even been revived in the hospital once before he finally passed. After his death, my grandmother would wake up in the middle of the night to hear his voice, moaning, calling out for help, just as he had before he died. She knew he was gone, but the sound of his pain never really left. Strange things kept happening. Every now and then, we hear the sudden crash of a pan hitting the ground on the back porch, but when we go to check, nothing had fallen. Once, my hamster's cage opened all by itself, right in front of me and my grandmother. It happened twice. One afternoon, I was reading a book in the living room when I looked up and saw something that made my stomach drop. A spoon resting on the table, was moving, rocking back and forth on its own. I stared at it, frozen. Months later, it happened again. This time, I was sitting at the computer near the kitchen when I noticed the spoon shifting, just like before. But instead of fear, I felt something completely different. A wave of happiness hit me out of nowhere. I couldn't stop laughing. It was like I was in a trance, lightheaded and giddy, for no reason at all. It didn't make sense. I had always been terrified of things like this. I've always believed I have a psychic ability, like I can sense things that other people can't. Spirits seem drawn to me. Sometimes I even feel like they communicate with me. I can predict things months before they happen, exactly how I imagined them. I don't know why, but it's always been that way. In October 2012, my dad and I moved out of my grandmother's house, just down the street into our own place. A week before we left, my grandmother had a dream. In it, my grandfather appeared to her, saying he was coming home. He said he was coming back to see the girl. I am the only granddaughter born after his passing, the only one connected to his side of the family. I believe, without a doubt, that in that dream, he was talking about me. I'm 18 now, and I no longer live in the house where these things happened. But I still think about it, and I still don't understand why my experiences there were so different from my sister's. The first thing I ever experienced happened when I was about 6. My parents had just built a brand new house, and for the first time, I had my own room after sharing one with my sister. I was so excited. My room was right next to hers, across from my parents' bedroom, and I always slept with my door open. For the first few months, everything was normal, but then I started having trouble sleeping. My dreams became vivid nightmares, always stretching endlessly, dark and empty, with disembodied hands reaching out for me, grabbing at me from the shadows. Then the knocking started. Every night, I would hear 3 knocks on my wall, slow and steady, like someone was asking to come in. At 6 years old, it terrified me. I told my parents over and over, waking them up night after night, but they never believed me. They said I was imagining things and got frustrated when I wouldn't let it go. Eventually, I stopped telling them. Instead, I would sneak into my sister's room and sleep next to her. Whenever I did, the knocking wouldn't happen, but when my parents found out, they forced me to sleep in my own room again, and just like that, the knocking started back up. One night, after a fight with my sister over her taking my toys, I taped a note to my door. It said something like, "Keep out. Big sisters only." Later that night, as I lay awake in bed, I heard the knocking again. This time, I saw an arm, pale, solid, unmistakably real, reach around the doorway and pull my note down. I was frozen. I wanted to believe it was my dad, but when I got up to check, both my parents were asleep in their room. My sister was also sound asleep in hers. I didn't go back to my room that night. After that, the knocking stopped for a while. A few years passed, and eventually, I felt safe enough to sleep in my own room again. But what happened next made me wish the knocking had never stopped. At night, I would hear my name being called. At first, it was faint, almost like a whisper, but then it became clearer. It was always the same, a voice just outside my door calling me. Then I started seeing him. A shadow figure. He never entered my room. He just stood there in the doorway, watching. And then, after a few moments, he would turn and leave. But the feeling I had when he was there, it was something worse than fear, something deeper, something that made my whole body tense, like I wasn't supposed to move, wasn't supposed to breathe. Even thinking about it now makes my skin crawl. But the worst thing that ever happened, the thing I still can't explain, took place in the last few months before we moved out. One night, I saw a silvery light through my bedroom window. At first, I thought it was just my neighbor's light shining from their side yard. But then, a ball of that same glowing light floated into my room, through the window, right in front of me. It was beautiful, and yet, the second I saw it, I felt something worse than I had ever felt before. Worse than the shadow man. Worse than the knocking. It was pure, overwhelming dread. A feeling so strong it made me sick to my stomach. I still don't understand why. Years later, my sister told me about her own experiences in the house, but they were nothing like mine. She had seen the figure of a little girl sitting on her bed, playing with her favorite stuffed animal. The girl had even spoken to her, saying, "Will you play with me? Come play with me." But the way my sister talked about it, she wasn't scared. She remembered it like it was something comforting, like an old friend. I don't understand how we could have lived in the same house, yet experienced such different things. A few weeks ago, my friend drove past the house. She was curious after I told her everything. She said the moment she saw it, she felt something bad. I've had other experiences in my life, but none connected to that house. And to this day, I still don't understand why any of it happened. Why would a brand new house be haunted? Why did my sister's experience feel so different from mine? I don't know as much about the paranormal as I'd like to, but I do know that whatever was in that house, it wasn't the same for both of us. I'm Christian, but I'm open to hearing what anyone thinks about it. In the summer of 1986, my mother and I moved into an apartment in a low-income complex. I still remember the first time we walked through it. I was just a kid, running around, excited about our new home while my mother talked to the apartment manager. My grandmother was with us that day. At one point, I ran into the bathroom to check it out, and as soon as I stepped inside, the door shut behind me. I don't know if I bumped into it, or if it somehow closed on its own, but the second it did, the lights flicked off. I reached for the handle, trying to open the door, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked. I started crying, banging on the door, too scared to understand what was happening. My grandmother tried the handle from the other side, and just like that, it opened. I know I wasn't imagining it. I had tried to open it myself, and it wouldn't budge. If nothing else had happened in that apartment, maybe I would have chalked it up to a child's clumsiness. But that was just the beginning. From the very start, something felt off about that place. My mother felt it too. It wasn't just an eerie feeling. It was a weight, a heaviness in the air that made everything feel wrong. It was like a shadow hanging over us, an unshakable sense of sadness that filled the apartment. I was scared of my room and often begged to sleep in my mom's bed. A few months after we moved in, my mother asked me one morning if I had been in the kitchen the night before. I told her no, that I had slept all night. She asked again, making sure I wasn't sneaking around for a late-night snack. She had heard the kitchen cabinets opening and closing, but I hadn't gotten up. I was too scared to even go to the bathroom alone at night, let alone wander into the kitchen. The noises kept happening. Night after night, we would hear the same sounds, the slow, rhythmic thunk of the cabinets bouncing shut. They weren't the kind that slammed. If you opened them and let go, they would swing slightly before softly closing. And that's exactly what we would hear over and over again. As if someone was opening them, then letting them go. One day, my mother and I walked to the office to pay rent. While we were there, another woman was collecting her deposit or some paperwork. She introduced herself to my mom and mentioned that she had lived in our apartment before. She asked how we liked it. My mom didn't say much, just that she was grateful to have an affordable place to stay. The woman gave her a strange look, hesitated, then asked if we had noticed anything unusual. My mom brushed it off, saying she sometimes heard noises, but assumed it was just the neighbors upstairs making vibrations strong enough to rattle the cabinets. The woman looked her right in the eyes and said, "Be careful. Take care." Then she left. We stayed in that apartment for another year. I spent my days at my grandparents' house while my mom worked, so we were only there at night. But that was when it felt the worst. There were nights I refused to sleep there at all, and we would stay at my grandparents' instead. As time passed, the feeling inside the apartment became unbearable. The uneasiness grew into something deeper, something I couldn't explain. I started feeling wrong, not just scared, but truly depressed, like a weight was pressing down on me. I was a happy kid before we moved there, but in that apartment, everything changed. I started refusing to go to school, shutting down emotionally, unable to find joy in anything. My mother was at her wits' end trying to figure out what was wrong with me. She eventually had me see a therapist, but nothing helped. I had no reason to feel the way I did, except for the fact that we lived in that apartment. One summer afternoon, we were outside having a barbecue with neighbors. It was a normal, happy day. Kids running around with water guns, parents grilling food, laughter filling the air. At one point, I told my mom I needed to use the bathroom. She handed me the apartment key, and I ran back inside alone. The moment I stepped through the door, everything changed. A thick, heavy presence filled the air, pressing down on me like I had just walked into a place I didn't belong. I stood frozen just inside the doorway, my skin crawling. It felt like someone, a man, was standing there, just out of sight. I forced myself to move, walking quickly down the hallway toward the bathroom. As I passed the towel closet and storage closet, I suddenly stopped. The air around me seemed to shift. Then I heard it. It was like a TV turning on and off right next to my ear. A loud burst of sound, then silence. Another burst of sound, then silence again. It happened over and over, like someone was hitting the mute button repeatedly. The noise made no sense, like snippets of voices in static, but it was right there, surrounding me. And then, behind me, I felt it. I knew, without a doubt, that someone was standing just inches away. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them, towering behind me, breathing down my neck. The air felt thick, suffocating. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. Then the noise stopped. The pressure was still there, but I finally broke free from whatever had frozen me in place. I bolted to the bathroom, barely pausing before rushing back out the front door. I didn't even bother locking it behind me. When I reached my mom, I told her I thought there was a man inside the apartment. She grabbed a neighbor and went to check. They found nothing, but she knew. I wasn't the kind of kid who made up stories, and she had felt it too all along. We stayed one more year before moving. Once we left, everything changed. The depression that had consumed me started to lift. It took a few weeks, but it was like I was waking up from a fog. My mother noticed it too. She said I was like a completely different child once we got out of that place. A new family moved in after us. A husband, wife, and their 2 kids. They only stayed about 6 months. From what I was told, the husband became violent and depressed. One night, he stabbed either his wife or a friend inside the apartment. I don't know all the details, but I do know that whatever lived in that apartment was not good. Years later, my mother finally opened up about what she had experienced. She admitted that there were nights she saw a dark shadow moving in the apartment. She had been terrified but never told me because she didn't want to scare me. In those last few months before we moved, we had started sleeping in the living room, with all the lights on. Looking back, I don't know what was in that apartment, but whatever it wasn't just a presence. It wasn't just a ghost. It was something evil. I was about 12 when this happened, staying over at my grandmother's apartment during summer vacation. She had just moved into the place and was still settling in, with boxes scattered around, waiting to be unpacked. We had always been close, so I decided to spend a couple of weeks with her, helping her get things organized. She always had sweets in the house, took me to McDonald's, and let me play video games. Staying with her was something I always looked forward to. One night, we stayed up late watching a movie on VHS. I must have fallen asleep partway through because when I woke up, the TV was off and my grandma had already gone to bed. I got up to use the bathroom, still groggy, not really thinking about much. Everything was quiet. After finishing up, I started making my way back to the couch where I had been sleeping. Then I stopped. Something was standing there. A tall shadow loomed over the back of the couch. It was dark, darker than the rest of the room, like it was absorbing the dim light around it. And it wasn't just standing there. It was leaning forward, looking down. Looking at me. My body went cold. I was standing there, wide awake, but I was also lying on the couch, asleep. I could see myself. The shadowy figure slowly lifted its head, as if realizing I was there. It had no face, just pure darkness. But I felt it looking right at me. It was wearing a hat. Not a baseball cap, but something wider, something like a cowboy hat. It started to rise, straightening up over the couch. Then, in an instant, I was back on the couch, gasping, heart pounding. I shot up, looking around frantically, but the room was empty. There was no one there, except there had been. I sat there in the cold, sweating, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I knew I had gone to the bathroom. I knew I had gotten up, but somehow I had also watched myself sleep while something stood over me. I didn't tell my grandma. I don't know why. I guess I just didn't know how to explain it. Even now, I don't know if it was a dream, sleep paralysis, or something else entirely. But whatever it was, it felt real. What do you think? A dream or something more? Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Growing up in Corning, California, also known as the Olive City, things were pretty quiet. It was a small town with not much to do, just one movie theater and no mall. Life was simple, but my home life wasn't. My parents had a complicated relationship, constantly separating and then getting back together. There was never any violence, just a lot of arguing. My younger brother and I were never the targets. It was always between them, but it made home an unstable place. Because of that, we often stayed at a relative's or a friend's house until things calmed down. When I was about 10, things got worse. My dad made some bad choices and ended up in jail. My mom packed up my brother and me, and we went to stay with a family friend, someone we had known for years. Out of respect, I'll call him Marty. Marty had 2 daughters, and his house was a typical 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom home with a garage and a backyard. Nothing about it seemed strange. His daughters were normal. No history of anything unusual, no weird stories. Even now, I'm still close to both of them. At first, everything seemed fine. My brother and I shared a room with the girls. My mom stayed in the guest room, and Marty had his own. But soon, strange things started happening. The first time, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of voices coming from the kitchen. At first, I just lay there, listening, thinking maybe Marty or my mom was up late talking. But as I sat up, I saw something strange. A faint glow, like the light from a TV, was coming from under our bedroom door. That was odd because we always shut the door when we went to bed. I turned to the oldest daughter, who was also awake, staring at the door. I whispered her name, and without looking at me, she said, "Sounds like they're back again. They scare me." I asked her what she meant. "The little demons," she said. That was enough to send chills down my spine. But at the time, I told myself she was just trying to scare me, and eventually, I forced myself to go back to sleep. The next morning, I told Marty what had happened. He just laughed and said, "The monsters in my house won't bother you as long as you go to bed on time." I didn't think it was funny, but I tried not to dwell on it, until something even stranger happened the following week. I was outside playing by myself when I heard my mom call my name. It was clear as day, as if she was standing right next to me. Without thinking, I answered, "What?" She hated when we did that instead of coming to her, so I immediately stopped what I was doing and walked toward the house. I pulled open the screen door and called inside. "What, Mom?" No response. Just as I was about to close the door, I heard her voice again. This time, it was coming from the garage. I ran to the garage door, pulled it open, but it was empty. I called out for her. Nothing. A little unsettled, I walked back inside the house. That's when I saw it. A note, sitting on the kitchen counter. She wasn't home. She had gone out to run errands. I wasn't alone. Marty was there, but he had been in the shower the whole time. When I asked if he had called me, he looked confused. No, I didn't say anything. It wasn't just that one time. Little things kept happening. You'd set something down, only to find it missing. until it reappeared exactly where you had originally left it. The hallway closet, the one where the vacuum was kept, would open on its own. Even if it had been shut tight, you'd walk by later and find it wide open. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear the voices again. Soft, quick whispers coming from the kitchen. I never got out of bed to check. I was too scared to see what was really there. When I was 7 years old, my grandpa passed away. But he wasn't just my grandpa. He was my best friend. We did everything together. Donut runs, walks to the park, building Lego cities, sharing meals. Some of the best memories of my childhood were with him. So when he passed in his sleep, it felt like my whole world had shattered. I cried for hours. My grandmother later told me that I had cried so much I eventually passed out from exhaustion. I still remember lying beside him in bed, his body so still, like he was just taking a quick nap. I begged him not to leave me, but he was already gone. The funeral came quickly, and I moved through it in a daze. Nothing felt real. In our Filipino tradition, we hold a gathering after the funeral to celebrate the person's life and their achievements. I didn't understand it at the time. It made me angry. How could everyone be celebrating when my grandpa was gone? I locked myself in the guest room and cried until I fell asleep. That's when I had the dream. I was standing in my grandmother's driveway. The garage door was open, and inside, my grandfather's coffin was just sitting there. It was open, but when I walked up to it, I saw that it was empty. Confused, I looked around, wondering why it was there and where my grandpa's body had gone. Then I heard it. Baby girl. I knew that voice. I spun around, and there he was, Grandpa Al, standing in front of me, smiling just like he always had. He looked healthy, strong, alive. My eyes filled with tears. But Grandpa, I thought you died. Everyone keeps telling me you're dead. He nodded gently. I know, baby. Don't worry. Grandpa won't leave you, all right? Now go on inside and enjoy the party. The whole family is here. I didn't want to leave him. I grabbed his hand, begging him to come inside with me. Sorry, sweetheart. Grandpa's got to take care of some stuff out here in the garage. But I'll meet you inside, okay? Save me some cake. He kissed my forehead, gave me one last smile, and ushered me inside. The house was full of family, and I excitedly told them that Grandpa was alive, that he was in the garage, but no one seemed surprised. They just smiled and told me it was time to cut the cake. I was so happy, knowing I'd get to share it with him. He always gave me the frosting. But just as I was about to get our slices, I woke up. The party was still going on outside my room, voices and laughter filling the house. I quickly unlocked the door and ran into the kitchen. I found my Grandma Lynn, my grandpa's wife, and told her that Grandpa Al was alive, that he was just fixing something in the garage. She looked at me with tears in her eyes, smiled, and hugged me tight. He'll always be with us in spirit, Gaby, she whispered. But I wasn't convinced. I ran to the garage to find him. It was empty. No coffin, no sign of anyone having been there. The garage door was closed. I checked everywhere, every room, the backyard, even the front of the house, but he was nowhere to be found. The truth hit me like a weight in my chest. Maybe it was just a dream, but I didn't want to believe that. I went to my grandpa's bedroom and sat on the bed, tears spilling down my face. He never liked seeing me cry. He always did whatever he could to cheer me up. That's when I felt it. A warm embrace wrapping around me from behind. A familiar scent filled the air, his cologne. I knew it wasn't possible for anyone else to be hugging me. The door was shut. I had locked it. But I didn't feel scared. I closed my eyes, smiled, and whispered, I love you, Grandpa Al. It all started about 3.5 years ago when my uncle's mother-in-law, who we'll call Ronnie, passed away. She had owned her house since the 1960s, but after her passing, my uncle and aunt wanted to sell it. She had taken out a reverse mortgage, and they needed to settle everything. The house sat on the market for about 6 months, untouched and empty. One day, after visiting the small apartment we had been living in, my uncle suggested that we stay in Ronnie's house until it sold. He needed someone to watch over it, and they were getting tired of constantly checking on the place. My mom agreed, and we started packing. We moved in the day after Thanksgiving, fresh off a warm and happy dinner at my uncle's house. But from the very first day, strange things started happening. As we were moving in, my mom told us she had just had the weirdest experience. She had been unpacking by the back glass door when she looked up and saw a girl standing there. It happened so fast that she thought it was me at first. She glanced back down for a second, about to say something, but when she looked up again, the girl was gone. My uncle laughed, saying that was nothing compared to what he had experienced. About a month before, while checking the house, he had been in the kitchen when he heard Ronnie's voice call his name from the back room. My uncle is a big guy, the kind you'd think nothing could shake, but he said the second he heard it, he bolted out of the house and stood on the street for 15 minutes before finally getting the nerve to go back in and lock the door. Then my little brother came outside, looking shaken. He had just seen a shadow figure in my parents' bedroom. Let me describe the house to help you picture it. It was tucked between Alhambra and San Gabriel, sitting up in the little hills. There was a park nearby with a small observatory. It wasn't in a gated community, but there was a gate running down the middle of the street, and we lived on the right side of it. The house itself was an odd N shape. Within the first week, my brother noticed something strange. He and my other brother had bunk beds in their room. The top bunk was next to a huge window facing the neighbors on the other side of the gate, but for some reason, my younger brother refused to sleep facing the window. He turned toward the wall instead. That's when he noticed something unusual. The wall's texture seemed to form a picture. The next morning, he traced it with a pencil and called us in to look. I regret not taking a picture of it. The image looked like two figures, one kneeling, human-like, with its hands outstretched, as if it were begging. The other figure loomed over it, ghostly, almost scolding it. That same week, I had my first nightmare in the house. I was sleeping in my bed when a black shadowy hand reached out from underneath and grabbed my ankle, yanking me downward. I woke up in a panic and bolted out of my room. My heart was racing. As time passed, we learned to ignore the strange occurrences, or at least pretend to. But the nightmares didn't stop. I had another dream of my room. Again, something was grabbing me, pulling me. But this time, I managed to escape. Then we noticed something else. Money kept slipping through our hands. No matter how careful we were, we couldn't seem to hold on to it. Someone mentioned feng shui to my father. If you don't believe in feng shui, let me tell you, it's real. When you walked into our house from the front door, you could see straight through the open wooden sliding doors to the back glass door. In feng shui, this layout is bad luck. It means any wealth that comes into the house flows right back out. It made sense why the house wasn't selling. Even my father, the biggest skeptic in our family, started saying something was wrong with the house. He and my mom would hear noises at night. Someone moving around in the kitchen. My mother thought maybe it was Ronnie, since she had loved cooking. Our cat seemed to sense it too. One night, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed him staring at something, watching something move around my room. I couldn't see anything, but the way he followed it with his eyes made me uncomfortable. I left my room and went to my parents. I was so scared, I started crying. They let me sleep with them that night. I was afraid of my own bedroom. My parents noticed I would sleep flush against the wall, wrapped in my blankets, trying to disappear. And then one morning, I woke up to something pressing down on me. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could feel hands on my neck, my wrists, my ankles, holding me down. Every time I tried to scream, the pressure got worse. It felt like I was suffocating. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. I stumbled out of my room, barely able to stand. My parents were in the living room watching TV. I told them what had happened, and tears streamed down my face as I described how I could still feel the hands on my neck. The nightmares kept coming. The suffocating weight. The figures. I started to fear falling asleep. And then my cat. who had been with me since I was a baby, suddenly got sick. I was devastated. A few weeks later, he passed away under my bed. Not long after, my father was lying in bed when he felt something furry brush against his leg, climbing onto the mattress. He didn't panic. He thought it was our cat. But the cat was gone. I started researching what was happening to me, and I learned about something called sleep paralysis. It described everything: the inability to move, the overwhelming sense of presence, the hallucinations. For a month after learning about it, the experiences stopped. I thought it was over. Then one night, I woke up to something gnawing on my ankle. I could feel the teeth sinking into my flesh, my leg moving back and forth. I screamed and ran out of my room. That was the last time I slept in there. The longer we stayed, the worse things got. My mom had her own experiences but never told us everything. One night she was lying in bed when she felt something touching her body. She looked over. My dad was sound asleep, turned away from her. In the bathroom, she once watched the toilet flush on its own, saw the sink drain suddenly clear itself after she had silently wished it would. My brother saw reflections of things walking past the mirror when no one was home. One night, I went to say goodnight to my mom. I saw her lying in bed, breathing under the blankets. I whispered good night, but she didn't respond. A minute later, as I was leaving the room, I nearly bumped into her in the hallway. I froze. "How are you here? I just saw you in bed." She looked confused. "I haven't been in bed. I was in the garage." Even now, I don't know who or what I had whispered goodnight to. The last week before we moved out, my brother had the scariest night of his life. He heard shuffling footsteps moving closer and closer to his bed. When he turned on his flashlight, whatever it was ran straight toward my stuff in the corner, like it was hiding. That was the last straw. We spent our last few nights sleeping at my aunt's house. The morning we finally moved, one of the garage lights exploded. No one was near it. We never looked back. My name is Gabriel. I'm 24 years old, and my wife is 22. This happened in 2011, when I was sent to Long Beach, K, for work. Since I was allowed to bring my wife with me on these trips, we made a mini getaway out of it. One of the nights, we decided to visit the Queen Mary, the famous haunted ship, just to walk around and take a tour. While we were roaming the ship, I got curious and started exploring areas that were a little tucked away, maybe even off limits. In one of the rooms, there was a low-hanging chandelier with crystal pieces dangling from it. As I walked by, one of the round crystal pieces fell, landing right at my wife's feet. She swore my head hit the chandelier, but I was sure I never touched it. Either way, I decided to pocket the crystal. I know I shouldn't have, but I thought it would be a cool little souvenir, something to say I had taken a piece of the ship with me. Nothing strange happened after that, even though we wandered through some eerie-looking places. A couple of hours later, we left and headed back to our hotel. The hotel we were staying at was more upscale than usual, really nice, and nothing about it felt off. That night, we went to sleep like normal. Then, at exactly 3:15 a.m., we were woken up abruptly by the blaring sound of our room's fire alarm. It was so loud and disorienting that we both shot out of bed, scrambling to throw on our clothes, ready to evacuate. We ran out into the hallway, expecting to see other guests evacuating too. But the moment our door closed behind us, the alarm stopped, and the hallway was silent. There were no people, no movement, no other alarms, just complete, eerie stillness. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, trying to process what had just happened. Eventually, we hesitantly went back into the room. That's when my wife told me about her dream. Right before the alarm went off, she had been dreaming that her mom, who is one of the sweetest people you could ever meet, was choking her. But in the dream, her mom wasn't herself. Her expression was twisted, her eyes glowing red, her face full of hatred. The choking felt real. She actually woke up struggling to breathe. And 10 seconds later, the alarm went off. She was still finishing her story when it happened again. the same deafening alarm. Once more, we rushed out into the hallway, expecting to see other guests evacuating. But again, there was nothing, just silence. I decided to head down to the lobby and talk to the front desk, while my wife went to the hallway restroom to wash her face and calm down. When I explained everything to the night auditor, he looked at me like I was crazy. He told me that, per fire code, if one alarm goes off on a floor, they all go off. And they hadn't. In fact, he called the fire department to check, and they verified that no alarms had gone off in the hotel at all. That was the last time it happened. We stayed for 2 more nights, and nothing else strange occurred. But my wife still swears that the crystal I took from the Queen Mary had something to do with it. And after everything that happened, I have to wonder, was it just a coincidence? Or was something following us that night? When my husband and I first moved into the house, I never expected anything strange to happen. It was right behind my parents' place, and since they owned it, they offered to rent it to us so we could be close, especially since I was expecting our first baby. It seemed perfect. The day we moved in, I was already past my due date. In fact, I ended up going into labor and heading straight to the hospital that same day. After our baby was born, my husband's job switched him to the graveyard shift, which meant I was alone at night with our newborn and our 2 Chihuahuas, Joe and Bear. My mom kept asking if I wanted her to stay with me. She was nervous about me being alone, but I brushed it off. I wasn't scared. I was a grown woman, and I had my dogs for company. I didn't think I had anything to worry about. A couple of months after moving in, I started waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of the closet door opening. It had a mirror with metal hooks on it, and whenever the door moved, the hooks scraped loudly against the frame, making a screeching noise that was impossible to ignore. The first time it happened, it was around 2 or 3 a.m. I sat up in bed and looked toward the closet. The door had opened about 6 inches. I glanced at the dogs. Both of them were awake, staring at the closet. I didn't know what to make of it, so I eventually went back to sleep. It happened again, and again. Over the next couple of months, I woke up to the same sound at least 5 more times. I told my husband, and he seemed more unsettled by it than I was. One night, while he was home, we both woke up to the sound of the closet door screeching open. He bolted upright in bed and just stared at the door. Nothing else happened, but he had trouble sleeping after that. Then, one night, something changed. I woke up to the usual sound of the door opening, but this time, after it had opened its usual 6 inches, it kept going. I watched as the door slowly moved on its own, creaking further open. That's when the dogs reacted. Bear, his fur bristling, started barking at the closet. Joe, usually the braver one, let out a whimper and ran under the bed, crying. I had never seen him scared of anything before. I sat there, frozen, watching as the door finally stopped moving. That night, I barely slept. The next day, I told my husband, and he immediately put a lock on the closet door. From then on, I made sure to lock it every night. For a long time after that, nothing happened. Then, about a year later, I was home alone one evening around 7:30 p.m. My husband was at work, and my son was at my parents' house. As I walked by the closet, I noticed it was slightly open. I never left it open, so I went to close it, but over time, the wood had warped, making it difficult to shut. I leaned my weight against the door, trying to force it closed. I banged along the edges, hoping to get it to latch. Then, in between one of my bangs, a loud, heavy thud hit the other side of the door. It was at shoulder height, as if someone had punched it hard. I felt the impact through my body. I stepped away, my hand still raised mid-motion. My mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened. I backed away from the closet, lowered my hand, and tried to stay calm. I went to the living room and sat in front of the TV, trying to pretend like everything was fine. But after 30 seconds, I couldn't take it. I left the house and went straight to my parents' place. I didn't even tell them why. It sounded too ridiculous. After that, my dad sanded down the closet door so it would close properly, and I always kept it locked. Nothing else happened for the next 5 years. But looking back, I realized there were other strange moments that I ignored. My mom once walked into the house through the back door, passing through the hallway on her way to the kitchen. She noticed one of the bedroom doors was open. A few minutes later, when she walked back, the door was closed. I had been sitting in the living room the whole time, the only one home. She got so scared she ran outside and called for my dad to check the house. Of course, there was no one there. Before we moved in, we hired someone to put in new tile in the kitchen. At one point, I found one of my husband's action figures inside the cabinet under the sink. My dad was there with me, checking the tile work, and I asked him why it was there. He told me the worker had put it there because he said it kept going off every time he walked by it. That didn't make sense. The action figure wasn't motion activated. As far as I knew, it didn't even make noise. Then, I remembered something else. Before we had lived in the house, my older brother and his wife had lived there. She once confided in me that she thought the house was haunted because she had seen the closet door knob rattle on its own. At the time, I laughed it off. But after everything that had happened to me, I wasn't so sure anymore. Now we're planning to trade houses with my parents, so we can have more room for our growing family. I don't want my mom experiencing anything strange in this house. She's already nervous enough as it is. I've burned sage. I've sprayed holy water. I just hope that whatever was in that closet is finally gone. But deep down, I can't shake the feeling that it never really left. The house was built in 1891 for Henry Butler, his wife Elizabeth, and their 3 children. At the time, it was a symbol of progress and success, equipped with all the modern conveniences people had come to expect: gas lighting in every room, a boiler system for heating, and even indoor plumbing with hot water connected to the bath. Henry Butler had worked his way up from a laborer at the California Powder Works to an executive position, earning both wealth and respect in the community. With his new status, he purchased land and had the house designed to reflect his family's accomplishments. They moved in during May of that year, but their time in the home quickly took a dark turn. Within a week of settling in, the Butler daughters nearly suffocated due to a poorly soldered gas pipe in their bedroom. The city's gas supply, which contained high levels of carbon monoxide, leaked into their room, and both girls barely survived. The pipe was repaired, but the house already seemed to carry an ominous weight. On April 26, 1898, an explosion at the powder works devastated the city. Among the injured were Henry Butler and his son, Henry Jr. They were pulled from the wreckage, but their wounds were too severe. A doctor told a company laborer there was nothing more to be done, and they were sent home to die with their family. Henry Butler passed away shortly after, while Henry Jr. lingered in agony for 7 days before succumbing to his injuries. Elizabeth and her daughters were shattered by the loss and couldn't bear to stay in the house. After burying their loved ones, they left for Sacramento, arranging for an agent to sell the home. The tragedy of the powder works explosion caused a shift in the city. Many people lost faith in the industry, and the house sat unsold for years. By 1900, the family stripped it of its furniture, brass fixtures, and cast iron radiators to recoup some of their financial losses. The house, now a hollow shell of what it once was, remained empty until a buyer finally emerged in 1902. Sean and Mary Sullivan purchased the home and set about restoring it, replacing the stripped fixtures and making it livable again. For 10 years, they enjoyed their time there until 1912, when an outbreak of influenza spread through the city. Sean, working at the county's largest bank, was unknowingly infected at work. He brought the illness home, and both he and Mary succumbed within days. Later that year, a young couple, the Millers, moved in with their infant daughter. They lived there peacefully until the Spanish flu pandemic of 1918. They avoided infection at first, but in January 1919, their daughter fell ill and was taken to a hospital in San Jose. She passed away within days. When the Millers returned home with her body, they too became sick and died in February. While the city was overwhelmed with deaths from the pandemic, the misfortunes in this house stood out. In April 1919, A sensationalized newspaper article titled "Thrice Damned is the House That Butler Built" recounted the tragedies in exaggerated detail, cementing the home's growing reputation as cursed. The house remained empty for several years, its story fueling local rumors. It wasn't until 1922 that the house was purchased again, this time by Kenneth and Mary Reed. If the house carried misfortune, it didn't seem to affect them. Kenneth worked for General Electric and found great success, earning multiple promotions. They modernized the house, replacing the gas lamps with electricity and converting the boiler system to natural gas. They even modified the carriage house to accommodate their automobile. Their happiness continued with the birth of their son in 1925 and their daughter in 1926. When Kenneth was offered a prestigious position at RCA in New York City in 1930, they left reluctantly, sad to part with the home they had loved. What followed was a period of instability. The house changed hands multiple times as banks and law firms went bankrupt during the Great Depression. It wasn't until 1936 that the Lapasque family moved in. Eric and Lucy Lapasque came from a wealthy fishing enterprise, but their time in the house was marked by unbearable loss. Their first child, a daughter, died at only 9 days old. They tried again and had a son in 1938, but he was diagnosed with hemophilia and died the following year after a minor fall. Overcome with grief, they withdrew from society. They had one final child in 1941, but he was born with a severe physical deformity. Lucy was never the same. Household staff later recounted how she would spend hours staring out of windows or talking to herself. In 1943, she mixed whiskey with laudanum, left a note for her husband, and threw herself down the stairs. Eric, unable to bear staying in the house, put it up for sale and left with his surviving son. The house was sold again in 1944 to the Yon family, Chinese immigrants who opened a tea house in the downstairs rooms while living upstairs. Their elderly grandfather passed away in 1945 from natural causes, and in 1949, a patron suffered a fatal heart attack in the dining room. By 1952, the Yons closed the tea house and moved away. Through the 1950s and 60s, 4 more families lived in the house. No known deaths occurred during this period, and for a time, it seemed the house's dark past had faded. It was updated with new electrical wiring in 1961, though the work was poorly done. In 1969, the Langley family, facing financial troubles, filed for bankruptcy and lost the house. With no buyers, it fell into neglect. Abandoned, the house became the focus of local myths. Neighborhood kids broke in looking for ghosts, and rumors of Satan worshippers led to graffiti-covered walls and floors. In 1974, 2 teenagers sneaked into the carriage house to smoke, accidentally setting it on fire. Trapped, they perished in the flames. The carriage house was destroyed, though the main house remained standing. The property was finally purchased in 1982 by Sam and Jeanette, who set to work restoring it after nearly a decade of decay. They removed graffiti, cleared out trash, and rewired the home. Although they made significant progress, by the 1990s, upkeep became too much. The house wouldn't hold paint, the grounds became overgrown, and the city frequently fined them for its deteriorating appearance. Jeanette was the last person to pass away in the house. She died of cancer in 1995, with Sam by her side. He never stopped hoping to see the house restored to its original grandeur. When my mother purchased the house, Sam was thrilled. We kept him updated with photos and stories as we brought the home back to life. In 2003, with the help of the Historical Society, we decorated the house in full Victorian Christmas splendor, recreating how it would have looked in 1891. Sam joined us that year, seeing his dream fulfilled before he passed away in 2004. The house has survived tragedy, abandonment, and over a century of change. It has seen 3 different centuries, and more lives than most places ever do. It has withstood disaster, loss, and time itself. Now, it's up to us to preserve it for future generations, to ensure its story continues, not just as a place of sorrow, but as a home full of history, resilience, and life. By my senior year of high school, our house was finally complete. My mother and I had spent years restoring it, researching its history, and bringing it back to its former glory. With the help of the Historical Society and county archives, we tracked down an original photograph of the house right after it was built. The descendants of the Butler family, the home's original owners, even provided us with interior photos from their time living there. We used these images as inspiration, positioning our furniture as closely as possible to the original layout and working tirelessly to restore the landscaping. My sister, who had only visited once with discouraging results, was now interested in returning. The strange occurrences in the house had faded. No more phantom music, no sudden power outages, no unexplainable figures in the hallways. We had even hosted Thanksgiving and Christmas gatherings without incident. It seemed like the perfect time to show her that the house was, at last, just a house. Unfortunately, she wasn't just interested in visiting. She wanted to stir things up. The history of the house had never been a secret to us. Through our research, we had discovered its tragic past. Many people had died there over the years, though not due to anything supernatural, just unfortunate circumstances that had created a reputation of misfortune. By the end of World War I, the house was already whispered about in town. 3 families had endured tragic losses, and at times the house had sat abandoned, left to vandals and trespassers. Local kids dared each other to sneak inside, and urban legends began to take hold. Even after moving in, we couldn't escape the stories. Whenever we told people where we lived, we were often met with wide eyes and hushed voices. One person claimed the house had once been used as a secret hospital where unnecessary surgeries were performed in the basement. This would have been alarming if the house actually had a basement. The only space below the house was a tiny room that once held a gas-fired boiler for heating the radiators. But people clung to their stories, insisting that the rest of the basement had been filled in to hide the evidence. It didn't take long for these myths to reach my sister, and she decided it was up to her to help the spirits trapped within the house. My mother and I had never felt troubled there. We had spent years living in the home and never felt anything disturbed or restless. But my sister wouldn't let it go. She nagged my mother for months until she finally relented and allowed a seance. Living in San Francisco, my sister had no shortage of professional psychics and mediums to choose from. Yet, for some reason, she settled on Madame M, a self-proclaimed medium who lived nearby. According to her pamphlets and advertisements, she had extensive experience conducting seances, complete with glowing testimonials from satisfied clients. Before she even set foot in the house, she had a list of strict requirements. No outsiders were allowed in until the seance. All religious symbols and crosses had to be removed. She also demanded something original from the house, something she could keep with her until the seance to build a connection with the spirits. We sent her an old, handmade nail recovered from an iron eagle that had once adorned the eaves of the house. My sister took care of the payment, and we waited for our so-called enlightenment. The night finally arrived, October 31, 2001. My sister had insisted on Halloween, believing it held psychic significance. Madame M arrived just after sunset. She led us on a tour of the house, pausing in different rooms, pressing a hand to her forehead and claiming to feel the presence of various spirits. She listed off names, none of which matched any of the names from our research. In the kitchen, she announced that someone had died there. Their name, she said, was Rick, Rich, Richie, or maybe Robert, Rocky, Ren, Ronald. The list went on. Not a single name was connected to the house's history. Oddly enough, she never mentioned anything about the stairway or front parlor, the 2 places where we had experienced the most activity. Instead, she led us back to the drawing room, where we all sat around a table. My mother, my sister's friend, myself, my friend, and Madame M all joined hands. She placed the nail we had given her onto a piece of paper and, asking the spirits to guide her, began to write. At first, it was just swirls and random letters, but soon she started forming words and sentences. We watched as she recounted many of the rumors that had been spread about the house, stories we had already heard from town gossip. Not one fact, not one confirmed name beyond the Butlers, the house's original owners. She claimed there was a dark energy coming from beneath the house and asked if we had a basement. No. Had anything tragic ever happened below the house? No. She asked a lot of questions, all of which we answered with no. After several minutes of this, she suddenly stopped and announced that she needed to rest. She asked to be led to the parlor so she could meditate. She had barely been gone for 30 seconds when we heard a piercing scream. We ran into the parlor. The room was ice cold and completely dark. The electricity had cut out suddenly. Madame M sat there, looking completely shaken. We asked if she had felt anything, but she refused to answer. We brought her back to the drawing room, gave her water, and suggested resuming the seance now that the house was showing activity. She was no longer interested. She checked the time, mentioned how late it was, and suggested that perhaps it was best to end the session. My sister, who had paid for the event, wasn't having it. She demanded that we continue. Reluctantly, Madame M picked up her pen and started writing again, but now she seemed hesitant. Her movements weren't as confident. Then, in the middle of writing yet another town rumor, she stopped. She looked toward the front hallway. Her face went pale. She stared for nearly a minute before standing up abruptly. Without a word, she grabbed her coat and excused herself. As she dug through her purse for her car keys, she dropped a handful of papers. My sister, irritated by the whole ordeal, picked them up, and that's when we saw them. Notes. Pages of notes about the rumors and myths surrounding our house, all written in Madame M's own hand. She had come prepared with every fabricated ghost story she could find. Even my sister, the biggest believer in the room, had to admit that we had been scammed. We never found out what Madame M saw in the hallway or what happened to her in the parlor. She continued offering her services for a few more months, but then suddenly closed her business and moved away. Some people said she was under investigation for fraud, but rumors have a way of twisting stories. We never saw her again, and we never held another seance. In 2008, I was living with my ex-boyfriend, pregnant with our daughter, in a small one-bedroom guest house behind his parents' home. It was a simple setup, just far enough from the main house to feel private, but still close enough that we were always in and out of each other's space. His parents had moved into their home in 1993, but back then there was no guest house, just an overgrown backyard and a small open-air shack. His father had told me about the strange things they found when they cleared out the land. The shack had cages attached to the walls, and there were deep scratch marks along the wood, as if something had been trapped there. The cages were old and rusted, like they had been there for a long time. The strangest thing, though, was the bone they found buried shallowly near a tree. They assumed it was from a dog, but out of curiosity, they had it checked. It turned out to be a human radius bone. That was just the beginning of the weirdness in that backyard. We often heard strange noises at night, but one evening, just a week or so before the most terrifying experience, my ex's mom was outside smoking with a friend when something happened. She felt a sudden gust of air rush over her head, and when she looked up, she saw a black shadowy figure shoot past them toward the tree. Both women screamed and ran inside, shaken and pale. When they told us what had happened, we laughed it off, joking that it was just the alien in the tree. From then on, whenever we heard a noise, we joked that the alien was watching. Then came the night I'll never forget. It was around 1 a.m. My ex was in the living room watching TV, and I was in the bedroom. Suddenly, the dogs in the pen at the side of the main house started barking uncontrollably. They weren't just barking. They were growling, whining, and yelping as if they were terrified, like they were trying to warn us or escape from something. Then we heard it. Something big was on top of our house. A loud galloping sound echoed through the roof, like a heavy animal running in circles above us. It wasn't just movement. It was fast and rhythmic, like a horse sprinting over shingles. But that made no sense. There was no way a horse could be up there. Then, layered beneath the sound of pounding steps, came a wailing noise. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal I had ever heard before. I ran into the living room, and my ex and I clung to each other, too scared to move. The galloping continued for several more seconds, pounding back and forth above us. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The dogs outside were still losing their minds, barking and crying. And then, a massive crack sounded from the backyard, followed by a crash so loud that it shook the walls. A huge branch from the tree had snapped off and crashed onto the roof, landing in front of our door. Leaves and debris blocked the entryway. We peered out the front window, staring at the enormous branch now leaning against the house. My ex's parents came running outside, yelling to see if we were okay. They insisted we get inside the main house immediately. We didn't hesitate. That night, we ended up sleeping in his mom's room. None of us felt safe alone. Just as we were finally starting to settle, the eerie sound returned. A low, horrifying yowl echoed in the distance. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a cat. It wasn't human, but it almost sounded like it was. All of us heard it. It was deep, drawn out, and unnatural. Something we had never heard before in our lives. And then, nothing. Silence. It never happened again after that night, but I could never shake the feeling that something was in that backyard. Years later, a friend of mine who lived near that area told me a story about something he had experienced. His backyard had a wall separating it from a large empty field. One night, he heard his dog barking and whimpering, so he went outside to check. As he approached, he heard a scratching noise on the other side of the wall. Then he heard a voice. It sounded human, but also not human. Before he could process what was happening, the voice let out a deep, unearthly yowl. He grabbed his dog and ran inside. When he told me this, it sent chills down my spine. He had told me this story years before I experienced what happened at my ex's house. When I shared this story with people, they always try to come up with a rational explanation. Some say it must have been a mountain lion, a raccoon, an owl, anything logical. But none of those things gallop, and none of them sound like that. And this wasn't some rural area. This was Los Angeles. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. We had lived in the Victorian house for about a year and a half by this point. Most of the major cosmetic repairs and electrical work had been completed, and while the house still had its quirks, it had truly become our home. My mother had worked tirelessly to make it warm and inviting, and we had even celebrated our first Christmas there. Despite this, visitors were rare. Friends from school often refused to step inside, describing the place as unsettling or wrong, and most of our extended family avoided it after hearing about the strange electrical failures that seemed to happen whenever guests arrived. Neither my mother nor I ever felt anything negative in the house. It was old, yes, and full of history, but to us, it had always felt peaceful. The first person to actually see something there wasn't even someone we knew well. It was the neighborhood newspaper boy, Nicky. It was early one morning in January, about 5:30 a.m., when he arrived at our front steps. His mother had been helping him on his route that day, driving him from house to house in the cold morning air. As usual, he walked up our stairs with the newspaper in hand, ready to slip it through the brass mail slot in the left door. The house had tall, narrow double doors with beveled glass windows, and even though the glass was old and textured, it was clear enough to make out shapes inside. After dropping the paper inside, he straightened up, and that's when he saw her. A woman stood in the hallway, near a small table between the doorways of the parlor and living room. She was reading something, her posture casual, as if she had just picked up a letter or a book. Even though it was still dark inside the house, he could see her clearly, almost as if she were illuminated by a hidden light. She was of average height and wore what he later described as old-time clothes. At first, he assumed it was my mother. He greeted her with a quick good morning. The woman lifted her head, turned toward him, and began walking in his direction. Her mouth was moving as if she was speaking, but no sound came through the door. It was only when she stepped near the parlor doorway that he realized He could see through her. She was transparent, her form blending into the dark wood trim behind her. That was enough for him. He stumbled backward, jumped down the steps, and ran full speed back to his mother's car. His mother later told us that when he got inside, he was pale as a sheet, visibly shaking. She had asked him what was wrong, but he refused to talk about it until they were far away from the house. From that day forward, he never came to the door again. Instead, he would simply throw the newspaper onto the front landing and speed off before anyone could come outside. When my mother and I got the call from his mother the next morning, we immediately went to check the hallway. There was, indeed, a table exactly where he described, but there was nothing on it. The newspaper he had delivered was lying just beneath the mail slot, proof that he had been there. Though we had always been aware of the strange happenings in the house, this was the first time someone outside the family had seen something so clearly. Months later, another sighting occurred, this time involving family. My uncle, aunt, and their 2 children had come to visit from Nevada. They weren't aware of the house's reputation, or they likely wouldn't have stayed. They were planning a trip to the Santa Cruz boardwalk, and rather than booking a hotel, decided to impose on us for the night, something we weren't surprised by, considering their tendency to be frugal. My aunt and uncle took the guest room, their daughter slept on the couch in the living room, and their son, whom I had only met once before, was given a sleeping bag on the floor of my bedroom. That night we played video games until about 11 p.m., then went to bed. At first, he dozed off without issue, but after a while, he started tossing and turning. He kept glancing at the clock beside my bed, restless. Around 1:30 a.m., he heard the distinct sound of footsteps coming down the hallway. The steps came from the far end, near the stairwell, and stopped just outside my bedroom door. That's when he noticed the door, which had been closed when we went to bed, was now open. Standing in the doorway was the silhouette of a tall figure. The shape moved slowly into the room, coming to stand right next to my bed. My cousin, frozen in place, watched as it seemed to linger there, almost as if watching me sleep. Then, without a sound, it turned and walked back through the doorway. The next morning, he casually asked me why my father had come in to check on me in the middle of the night. I stared at him. My father had died years ago. My bedroom door was wide open when we woke up, but my cousin didn't recall hearing it move. In fact, he insisted that it hadn't made a sound when it opened, even though the doors in the house were anything but silent. This was the first time the footsteps in the hall had been linked to an actual figure, and I pressed him for details. When he realized that the only other man in the house was his father, who was far shorter than the figure he had seen, he grew visibly upset. That day, they packed up and left for their trip to the boardwalk. But instead of coming back afterward as planned, they drove straight home to Nevada. Later, my aunt told us that their son had seemed sick and pale for the rest of the day, so they decided to cut their vacation short. Weeks passed, and life in the house returned to normal. Then, one night, something happened to my mother. We were watching movies in the living room, and during a commercial break, she got up to grab a snack from the kitchen. The fridge door was open as she bent forward, looking through the shelves, when she heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. She kept searching for something to eat, assuming I had walked in behind her. Then she heard a voice, soft, close, "Mother." She froze. I never called her mother, only Mom, and I was still sitting in the living room, nowhere near the kitchen. She called out, asking if I wanted anything while she was up. No reply. That's when she noticed the shadows. 2 distinct shapes were visible on the floor, their dark outlines cast beneath the refrigerator door. It looked like someone was standing there, blocking the hallway light. Again, she asked if I wanted something. Silence. A sudden chill ran through her. Without thinking, she grabbed the fridge door and slammed it shut, expecting to see me standing there. There was no one, just an empty kitchen. She turned back toward the living room, but I was still exactly where I had been, watching TV. Neither of us said anything for a while. We didn't have to. Even after all this time, the house still had its mysteries. By this point, we had lived in the Victorian house for about a year and a half. Most of the electrical work had been completed, the cosmetic repairs were well underway, and the house felt more like home than ever. While strange things still happened now and then, the occasional sound of footsteps, the feeling of unseen presences, or the unexplained flickering of lights, we had settled into a kind of routine with it. It was old, it had history, and whatever lingered in it didn't seem threatening. Then my grandmother came to visit. She had been living in a retirement community in California since my father passed, but she had decided it was time to move back east to be closer to family. Before leaving, she wanted to spend a month with us, helping my mother decorate the house and spending time together. Mom and I were a little nervous about how she would react to the house. My sister had fled in fear 6 months earlier, and though nothing too intense had happened since then, we weren't sure how the house would respond to a new presence. At 85, my grandmother was still surprisingly energetic. She loved the house immediately, saying it reminded her of places she had lived in throughout her life. She was especially excited about decorating the front parlor and dining room with period furniture. The first night, we stayed up late talking about her life, her move, and the history of the house. At around midnight, we all went upstairs to bed. I checked in on her before turning in, relieved to see that the power in her room stayed on. For the first few nights, everything was completely normal. The house seemed to welcome her. But then, something strange happened. One morning at breakfast, she casually asked how I managed to find my way in the dark when walking down the hallway at night. I looked at her confused. She explained, "Well, I've heard you the last couple of nights, walking down the hall to your room, but I never saw a light under the door." I didn't say anything at first. I knew exactly what she was talking about, the footsteps. They had been happening since we moved in, always coming up the stairs, walking slowly down the hall, stopping outside bedroom doors. But by this point, my mother and I had learned to ignore them. We had grown so used to them that we rarely even woke up anymore when they happened. I didn't want to worry her, so I just mumbled something about it not being a problem and decided to tell my mom later. But Mom never brought it up. Maybe she thought it wasn't worth alarming her since she was leaving soon. Or maybe she just didn't want to acknowledge it. Then about 2 weeks into her stay, my grandmother mentioned something even stranger. I came home from school one day to find her sitting in the front parlor. She had spent the morning helping Mom clean and decorate, and now she was relaxing with a book. When I walked in, she looked up and asked me to check if we had left a radio on somewhere in the house. "I've been hearing music all day," she said. I checked. There were only 2 radios in the house, one in the living room and a small CD player in my room. Both were off. When I told her, she frowned. "I know I'm not imagining it," she said. "It sounds like an old radio station, maybe AM." At first, I heard "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," but it sounded tinny, distorted. Then there was a man singing, and after him, another man, but the second one was terrible. I was glad when that song ended. My grandmother was sharp. She had no history of hallucinations, and her hearing was good enough that she could hear the softest creaks in the hallway at night. I didn't know what to make of it. That night when Mom got home, we talked about it. She suggested that maybe my grandmother had overheard a car radio outside, but that explanation didn't make much sense. The houses on our street were quiet, and she had heard the music all day. The next day, it happened again. Once more, she heard "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," followed by the same 2 men singing. This time, she tried to track the sound, but no matter where she went, the volume stayed exactly the same. It wasn't coming from one direction. It was just there. I sat in the parlor with her for 2 hours, waiting to hear it. Nothing. On the 3rd day, things escalated. When I got home, my grandmother wasn't in the parlor. She was in the kitchen. I had to leave, she said. The music got so loud it was hurting my ears. It wouldn't stop. She looked genuinely unsettled. Then she asked me something that sent chills down my spine. "Who was that boy?" I stared at her. "What boy?" "The one who left for school with you this morning." He was smiling, but I didn't recognize him. I figured he was your friend. I hadn't left with anyone that morning. I had been completely alone. My grandmother seemed confused when I told her that. He was wearing blue, she said. He had red hair. He looked so happy. That night when Mom got home, we finally told my grandmother everything. The footsteps in the hall, the old music, the electrical problems that happened whenever guests arrived. My mother admitted to hearing the sound of rushing water in the parlor walls, even though the pipes were long disconnected. Then there was the boy. We couldn't explain it. My grandmother was certain she had seen him, but she never saw him again after that day. The music, however, continued for the rest of her stay. Always the same tinny sound, always the same song. Before she left for the East Coast, she said something that stuck with me. "I think you have a friend here," she told me, "even if you don't know who he is." After she moved to Boston, she never heard unexplained music again. She never saw any strange figures. It was only in that house that she had experienced those things. And to this day, I still wonder, who was the boy in blue, and why was he smiling? When I was first married, my first marriage, that is, my ex-husband and I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in West Sacramento, right across the river from the city. It wasn't much, but it was home. At least, that's what I tried to believe. The first time something happened, I was alone. I heard what sounded like footsteps crossing the living room, no more than 10 feet from where I sat on the couch. It wasn't just the sound of movement. I could hear the distinct crunch of someone stepping on thick, new carpet, the kind with padding that hasn't yet been worn down. Except our carpet was anything but new. It was that awful green shag from the 70s, flattened and rough. Barely any padding left at all. There was no reason for it to sound the way it did. I tried to brush it off, but then it happened again. Another night, again alone, I heard laughter, but not the kind you want to hear. This was wild, unnatural, almost theatrical, the kind of exaggerated laughter you might hear in a haunted house attraction. It echoed through the room, but when I turned to look, there was nothing, just silence. We still lived in that apartment when my son, Nathan, was born. He was just a few weeks old when I heard the footsteps again. It was early morning, and I was in the bedroom getting ready for a well-baby appointment. Nathan was sleeping peacefully in his bassinet in the living room, since our bedroom was too small to fit it. Then came the crunching footsteps. My heart stopped. It wasn't just my imagination. I had heard it before, and this time, I knew exactly where it was coming from. It was moving toward my son. I didn't think. I ran. I reached the living room in seconds and grabbed Nathan, holding him so close I could feel his tiny breaths against my neck. The room was empty, but I wasn't imagining it. You might think the sounds were coming from an adjoining apartment or from upstairs, but the footsteps were always in the same place, right by the wall between the bedroom and the living room, and there was no one living in the apartment above us at the time. We moved out when Nathan was about 3 months old. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Not long after we left that apartment, Nathan started waking up with bite marks on different parts of his body. At first, they were small, round, about the size of a quarter, perfect circles, appearing on his legs, his arms. Then one morning, I saw a bite in the middle of his back, a place no infant could possibly reach. And it wasn't just happening at home. Even when we visited friends or family, I'd find new marks on his skin. The locations were strange. His foot, his thigh, once even the bottom of his tiny foot. I told myself he must have been doing it to himself somehow, but deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. Then came the night that changed everything. Nathan woke up crying, and when I went to him, his foot was swollen. A fresh bite was there, red and inflamed. I panicked. We rushed him to the doctor, desperate for answers. The doctor took one look and said, "You need to get rid of your dog immediately, or I'll have to call Child Protective Services." I wanted to scream. I knew it wasn't our dog. The bites were too perfect, too small. A dog's bite wouldn't leave a mark like that. But the doctor wouldn't listen, and I was terrified of losing my child. The next day, my ex-husband took our dog to the shelter. They put her down, and the bites didn't stop. At that point, I had no answers. I had ruled out everything. My ex wasn't home when some of them appeared. There were no animals, no logical explanation. And yet, the marks kept coming. I don't know what pushed me to do what I did next. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was pure instinct. One night, I woke up and felt something heavy in the air. I went to my son's room, standing just outside his doorway, and in a voice that barely sounded like my own, I said, "In the name of Jesus Christ, Satan, either leave this home or stand before me." Silence. I stood there, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Nothing happened. No shadows moved. No voices whispered back. But something changed. After that night, the bites stopped. Years went by. Life moved on. But a few months ago, Nathan, now in his 30s, told me something I wasn't prepared to hear. "Mom," he said, "I still wake up with those bites sometimes." I felt sick. After all this time, whatever it was had never left him. He had never had an easy life, and now I couldn't help but wonder, had something attached itself to him all those years ago? And if so, how do I set him free? When my mother decided it was time to move back into town, I didn't think much of it at first. I was a teenager, focused on school, friends, and the convenience of being closer to everything. But the house she chose, a 2-storied white Victorian, gave me an uneasy feeling the first time I saw it. It wasn't just old. It was worn, decayed from years of neglect. The paint was peeling, the wood around the eaves was rotting, and rusted iron eagles clung to the house like forgotten sentinels. Inside, the hardwood floors were uneven, each room slanting in a different direction. The doors, fitted with old skeleton keyholes, never quite latched properly, opening on their own when they pleased. The windows rattled at the slightest movement, their original hand-blown glass warped with age. My mother had always dreamed of living in a Victorian home, and despite my lack of enthusiasm for restoring a place that looked straight out of a horror movie, I went along with it. At the time, I was more worried about whether the house had working plumbing or if I'd be able to get cable TV. The first strange experience happened within a week of moving in. My mother was the first to notice it. She often felt like someone else was in the house, especially in the front parlor. Not a threatening presence, just a sense of someone nearby. Sometimes she heard the sound of water dripping inside the walls, though the radiator system had been shut off years before. Concerned about potential leaks, she hired a plumber, who assured her the pipes were completely dry. Then, when the painting started, things escalated. One night, while reading in bed, she heard footsteps. They started downstairs, moving slowly up the staircase, past her room, and down the hall toward mine. At first, she assumed it was me getting up for water or a snack, but she never heard a door open or close. She brushed it off until it happened again. The same deliberate footsteps, the same path. Up the stairs, past her door, stopping near my room. She checked the house, finding nothing out of place. I was asleep. The front door was bolted shut. The windows were all locked. It happened again and again, always the same. One set of footsteps, followed minutes later by another, as if 2 unseen figures were making their way through the house. My mother, who had always believed in ghosts, wasn't afraid. She told family about it but kept it from me, until I had my own encounter. A few weeks later, I fell asleep on the sofa in the makeshift living room at the base of the stairs. My mom had turned off the TV but left me there. Sometime around 11:30, a metallic clang jolted me awake. It sounded like 2 pipes striking together, coming from the wall near the old, defunct radiator. I sat up, disoriented, listening. Then came the footsteps, a steady, deliberate thud, moving up the staircase. It wasn't just creaking wood. It was the sound of heavy steps pressing into the old carpet runner. But something was off. The steps weren't even, like someone walking naturally. They started, stopped, then started again, as if whoever, or whatever, it was moved in bursts. They reached the top of the stairs, paused, then turned toward my bedroom. I held my breath, waiting for the sound of my door shutting. Nothing. Just silence. Minutes passed. Then another set of steps, louder this time, heavier, like someone in boots. Again, they moved up the stairs, down the hall, and stopped. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally stood up and checked the hallway. It was empty. The front door was still locked. The house was still. I woke my mom and told her what had happened. She just nodded. She already knew. As time passed, we got used to the sounds of footsteps at night. We stopped questioning it. It became part of the house, like the creaky floors and the uneven walls. Friends and family heard and saw things, too. Doors opening on their own, shadows where no one should be. The house is almost fully restored now. My mom still lives there. And the footsteps haven't stopped. That summer night, the sky was painted in shades of pink as the sun dipped below the horizon. I still remember the view as we drove down the hill, one of those moments that just sticks with you. My sister and I had to make a quick run to the 7-Eleven about 3 miles away. We needed to grab a pack of smokes and some cheap wine. Classy, I know, but at 21, I was just excited to buy it legally. The trip didn't take long, maybe 10 minutes at most. But as we drove back, something felt off. The sun had barely set when we left, yet now, the darkness had settled in fast, too fast. The air had changed too. A thick fog rolled in out of nowhere, covering the streets like a blanket. In San Diego, during the middle of summer, fog at 8 p.m., especially this far inland, was unheard of. We reached the main intersection near home, the one that crossed a busy thoroughfare. But as we sat there waiting for the light, something strange happened. There were no cars, not one. On a road that was normally packed, we sat in complete silence. That's when we realized something even stranger. Our radio wasn't playing. It had been on earlier, but now there was nothing. Just dead silence. I reached down to check the volume, but it wasn't that. The radio simply wasn't working. My sister and I exchanged confused glances, then looked at the clock. 8:52 p.m. That didn't make sense. How had we lost so much time? We had only been gone a few minutes, but nearly an hour had passed. And the fog, the darkness, it felt like we had slipped into another time entirely. We sat there, unsettled, both of us quiet. Then, at the exact same moment, we saw it. And we both asked the same question, not who, but what. Something was emerging from the ravine alongside the road, a deep, tree-lined drop-off that ran parallel to the highway. Whatever it wasn't moving like a person. It wore a long, black trench coat and a wide-brimmed hat, but beneath that, it was impossible to make sense of. It had no feet, no hands, and the way it moved, jerky, unnatural, almost like it didn't know how to control its body. It walked toward the road, if you could call it that. It moved oddly, like it was limping, struggling, but at the same time, it was fast. Too fast. It was heading straight for my car, and with purpose. For a moment, I thought maybe it was injured. Maybe it needed help. But then I saw how smoothly it was navigating the road despite its awkward movements. And the closer it got, the more I realized it wasn't struggling at all. It was coming for us. As it drew nearer, I forced myself to look directly under the hat, to see its face. I wish I hadn't. It wasn't one face. It was many, constantly shifting, changing. 1 second it looked like an owl, then a horse, then a human face, but without any real features, like a mask, blank and unnatural. It was as if it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. That's when my sister lost it. She started panicking, yelling at me to roll up the window. My hands fumbled, but I managed to close it. But still, we sat frozen. Neither of us could take our eyes off of it. Then it moved. It covered the 60 yards between us in mere seconds. It wasn't just walking. It was coming. My sister was screaming at me to run the light, but I couldn't move. I should have been terrified, and I was, but something else held me there. Curiosity, maybe, shock, some deep, unexplainable pull to understand what I was seeing. It reached my driver's side, just inches away. Then it lunged. Its arms, too long, unnatural, shot toward my door handle. At that exact moment, the light turned green. I slammed my foot on the gas, tires screeching against the pavement as we sped forward. My heart was pounding. My sister twisted in her seat, staring out the back window. Then she whispered, "It's throwing a tantrum." I didn't dare look, but she described it later, how it raised its long arms into the air, its whole body shaking, almost like it was furious. Then, just like that, it was gone, vanished into thin air. By the time we reached home, our mother was outside, waiting for us in the driveway. She was crying, standing with the neighbors, frantic. As we pulled in, she ran toward us, demanding to know where we had been. We checked the clock. 10:43 p.m. Somehow, we had lost over 2 hours, and yet, neither of us could explain where that time had gone. We told our mom everything that night. At least, I think we did. She swears we did, years later. But the next morning, it was like the whole event had been wiped from our minds. Neither of us talked about it. Not once. Not to each other. Not to our mother. It was just gone. Then, 5 or 6 years later, I was sitting on my balcony with my sister, when out of nowhere, the memory crashed back into my mind. I turned to her and asked, "Do you remember that night?" She went pale. We both broke out in goosebumps. It had been years since we had even thought about it, but now it was as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. She recalled every detail exactly as I did, down to the last second. And that's what still gets me. How did we both forget something so terrifying for so long? And why, when we finally remembered, did it feel like we had just woken up from something? My sister hates when I bring it up. Even now, it makes her sick to her stomach. But me, I still can't stop wondering. What really happened that night? And more importantly, what was it?